Jesse, how did you convince your parents that making a movie was better than going to college?
Well, it took a lot of convincing, for sure. Um, I think that, my whole life I was just always kind of doing my own thing, making films from an early age. And it was never one that I really liked learning in a classroom setting, and I kind of knew that uh, I was probably going to do it. They probably knew that I was going to do it either way, with or without their help. And so, they could kind of get behind and try to help me with this, or I would just be going off and doing it either way. And so I think they kind of knew I was really self-driven and had kind of that in me, and that's just what I thought was the best for me to learn, kind of how to expand my career. But um, I had to put together a budget and proposal and kind of explain to them how I would do this, and that I would hire actual adult filmmakers, I guess, and it would be an actual kind of learning experience. It would basically be my film school, just a totally different version of it, and yeah, I think once they actually saw it coming together, they realized it really was a pretty amazing thing to have pulled off, even too. And then the fact that it ended up getting a small distributor and had this release, and I think that it was kind of a once in a lifetime kind of experience, just that, and so much came from it, both for me personally and professionally, and it was. I don't necessarily think that that's what everyone should do, but for me, it was the right thing, and really worked out, I think.
Were your parents teachers?
No, no. I mean, my dad was like a carpenter. My mom was a small business consultant. So none of them had any sort of, connection to film or creativity or anything like that. But yeah.
When it was all said and done, how much did it cost to make that movie?
My first feature, I think, cost about $60,000. I tried to figure out how could I make this the smallest amount of money possible, but still make it look and feel like a real movie. And then how much could I raise? I basically, how I funded it was I got friends and family to kind of give money, kind of the Kickstarter model. But this was in 2003, 2004, even before really that existed. But that same idea. And then I basically went to my parents and said, hey, would you consider giving me the money that I would have used, you would have maybe put into helping me with college, to make this movie instead? So kind of putting it all that together, plus lots of other kind of in-kind things, was able to make this movie at the age of 17 that, this was in, again, 2003 when we shot it. I was a senior in high school, or just about to be. And so, if you watch it now, it probably wouldn't feel that legit, but back then it definitely felt and looked like a real movie, and was definitely impressive for someone so young to have pulled off, I guess. Yeah.
How much convincing did that take for them to put in your quote unquote college fund into this film?
I mean, I think it definitely took a lot of convincing. Yeah, at first they didn't necessarily think that was the best idea, but they kind of knew I was going to do it one way or the other, and I just had kind of always been like that. The film, they knew that I instead of having other passions or projects, I didn't really do sports. I didn't have a lot of other things outside of it. This was my passion, was making films, and I spent all my time working on it and writing and creating stuff. And so they just knew that that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I was going to do. And so I think they saw they could actually help me do that, and rather than trying to hold me back or force me to go down a certain model, I could do this and I would learn something from it either way. Even if it was a complete disaster, I would learn how to have made a film and how to have almost run a business in a sense, right? Because you have to manage the budget and hire people and all that sort of stuff. And my mom was a kind of a business consultant for helping people start their own small businesses. So she was almost a de facto producer, even though she didn't know anything about it, but she was able to kind of give me all these insight into actually how to pull that off and everything. And yeah, it was definitely an adventure.
So they knew that sort of the Jesse train was leaving, and if they wanted to get on, they could get on,
Totally.
but it was going to happen.
Totally, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When it was all said and done, did they sit you down and say, we're glad we did this, and this is pretty cool?
Definitely. No, I think the first time I put together a little trailer while we were editing the movie, and they saw it, and I think they were kind of blown away because they hadn't really seen much while I was filming and making the movie. They were supporting by helping do some craft service and stuff, but they barely even came to the set. Like they kind of just let me do my own thing. And so when they saw it, yeah, I think they were kind of completely blown away because it was such a different elevation beyond what I had done before, which was much more of a home movie style kind of thing, And so, yeah, no, they were really impressed, and I think realized it was no matter what would happen with it, it would have been worth it for kind of the experience I'd learned, all the different aspects of kind of pulling this together, what I had learned and the experience I'd gotten from it.
So you still had to go back to morning classes or whatever, even after you shot it, and you're still in high school as a senior?
Yeah, totally. So I shot it between the summer of my junior and senior year, and so then I basically was editing it after school during my senior year. Again, I hired like a real editor, let's say, like not just my friend, like someone who was a grown-up, I guess, because I was like 17, 18 years old, who had done a couple films. And so he would basically edit it during the day, and I would go to his house after I left school in the afternoon, and we would work on a scene, and then I'd do that the next day. And yeah, so while my friends were going to like, I don't know what, after school, they would always ask me to hang out. I'd be like, sorry, I can't, I gotta go edit my movie, and they didn't really realize, what I was actually working on and what I was doing. But yeah, it was definitely a different kind of senior year, but it was awesome.
And this was all before DSLRs too, correct? So.
Yeah, we shot the movie on, it was called like DVC Pro 50, So this was almost like before HD was even like, HD cam was just starting to come out. This was like, this was this weird time period in the early 2000s where, cameras were still kind of figuring themselves out. Yeah, this was before DSLR. This was like a kind of, a very weird time of transition, I guess, for me personally, like I started editing on like tape to tape with like VHS, tapes. That was kind of my generation age. And then by the time we started making the feature, where I was editing on, with Final Cut, I guess at the time. And but yeah, it was the era where you still had to like, make a DVD to be able to like watch it at your house or whatever, So yeah.
The movie was Living Life, correct?
Yeah, the movie was called Living Life. It was about a teenage boy who gets cancer and kind of what he does with his life after that. Kind of a coming of age movie. It would feel like a Hallmark or kind of like Lifetime movie now. It's not. I don't really know why I made this movie. It had no personal connection at the time to it. I think I'd become really interested in just the fact that films could make you feel something, and I was trying to kind of tap into some sort of emotion. And I think at the time too, there were so many films that were kind of dealing with that subject of like loss or dying, and I think that was my kind of how a lot of filmmakers copy something when they're starting out. Rather than copying the exact story, I was kind of copying this mood that I wanted to create, and the mood was I guess to make people sad or make people feel something, and so that's kind of where that idea came from. It's not the film I would make now, and it's not the film I think I should have made, but I was able to kind of weave in elements from my life and kind of this kind of teenage angst kind of vibe, I guess, of figuring that self out. But because the main character was my same age, but the other more serious parts of the film I didn't have something I could relate to in that sense. So I think that part is probably the weaker part of the film because it's not the authentic part, and that's, but I think that was one of the great learning experiences of making it, was just kind of realizing, whatever you write, it really has to come from some part. It has to come from you, and you got to find that kind of personal connection to really make it feel authentic and real, And so I think that's really what I took away from making it, is just kind of whatever I was going to write next or the story I was going to make next had to have something that was even stronger of a kind of personal connection. Even if it's the characters themselves, writing more of myself into them or something like that. And I think that first film, because I was so young, probably started writing it when I was 15 or 16 years old, just didn't have that because I didn't understand at the time, that's really what you had to do,
What were some of the mistakes that you made on the film looking back?
I think the main mistakes would be, one is just the script not being strong enough, not having the real personal connection that I could authentically kind of tell that story in the best way possible. And then I think the other aspect was just underutilizing kind of the actors and realizing, because up until this point I'd used my friends and friends of friends, my parents' friends to be my actors, right? And this was my first time working with professional actors. And so that was really overwhelming, and didn't really know how to kind of fully get everything out of them, I think, And so I think if I had done it again, I would have made another short or something first, maybe with professional actors, or kind of, I don't know. It's hard to say, because when I went to go make this movie, I never thought, okay, this is going to be some huge success. I never thought it would even get distributed. It was really supposed to be kind of my way of going to film school and learning, and that's what it was. It's just, if I'm thinking of it as like the critical side of like how could it have been the best movie, that's probably what I should have done. But in a sense, it was kind of this like film school learning experience all wrapped into making a movie, I guess. It would probably be the best way you could actually become a filmmaker. It just would be probably the most expensive and wasteful way if you didn't have it all figured out, I guess, too. But yeah.
When you tell a similar story to other filmmakers who have, let's say, student loans from film school, do they comment? Do they say anything?
I mean, so yeah, I mean, I've met a lot of young filmmakers in my day, both as a filmmaker, and then I ran this film festival for young directors for many years. And so I've met every kind of filmmaker, from ones that went to really expensive, fancy film schools to didn't go to any film school. And I think the thing is that there's no perfect or right way for everyone. It's like everyone learns differently. For me, I just never, in general with school, I didn't like being in a classroom and having to kind of sit and learn. I want to just get in there and grab the camera and do it, because that's how I learned it from the very beginning as a little kid. And so I think for me, I realized just film school, it's not, I mean, I looked at some film schools, I thought about it. It's not like I was like anti-film school. It just, I also really wanted to just make a movie and start doing it. And so I kind of realized, I maybe couldn't do both, I couldn't do one or the other. And so if I had the opportunity to make a feature, I should go do that. But that being said, I think there's a huge amount of advantages to film school. Number one, probably the people you meet at it and the relationships you can build that you can kind of carry on for the rest of your career and just even in your social life. Of course, you can always, learning more about filmmaking is never going to hurt you, right? So even if you don't think you need it or don't want it, it's always going to open up something else and probably inspire you in some other way. So definitely not anti-film school, but I think that if you really want to be a director, I wouldn't necessarily go to the most expensive film school, put all your money into that. There are other ways to learn and maybe save some of that money to go make a short or something at least afterwards.
So you're, I hate to use this term, a self-starter. It sounds like something on your resume, but I mean, it sounds like you like to just be in the action. You like to do things yourself.
100%, yeah. I mean, ever since a young age, I was always very like entrepreneurial, I guess. Because even before I was making movies, I was like, as a kid, I had like a newspaper, and then I was actually a magician for a while as a kid, like a legit one that would do parties and stuff like that.
Oh, cool.
I did some acting, but more like I put on the plays in a lot of ways. So I was always just kind of trying to entertain people and kind of put together experiences, I guess. I was also a very shy kid, and so it was kind of this opposite side of my personality where I would be very shy, but then when I could actually put together some sort of like experience, I would kind of turn on or whatever. But yeah, I always just liked creating things and making people feel something, whether that was from putting on a play or making a little short film or whatever. And I think I just realized, because unless I just figured out how to do it myself, no one was going to show me. Because especially back then, it's like, I didn't even own a camera myself when I was a kid. I mean, I borrowed my neighbor's old VHS camera. Like that's how I made my first little movies, And so it's just so different back then, where you couldn't just pick up an iPhone and start making it. You had to, you just had to kind of figure it out. So I think that's where a lot of that came from, was just kind of like having to figure out how to make this and pull it off. And I think too, just for my personality, is when I decide I'm going to do something, I just go all in. And so whether it's the film or whatever I'm going to do, it's like if I decide I'm going to do that, then yeah, I'm going to have to dive in and figure it out and take on every aspect of it to kind of piece it together.
And I bet there's so many elements that cross over between being a magician and film, because you're sleight of hand of so many things.
For sure. And that was actually one aspect I worked into that first feature. There was this little side story with him learning magic from his grandfather that had been kind of separated from the family, and teaching and doing magic at the hospital where he was being treated, which sounds like kind of a soppy story, but actually I was doing that at that same time. I was a magician. I would go to these hospitals sometimes and do magic. And so I was able to kind of take that kind of story from my own life. And yeah, I think magic and film is very similar because it's both kind of creating this illusion or whatever. And I just love nothing more than being able to, whether it was doing a magic trick back then, which I don't do anymore, or a film magic trick or whatever, but making somebody feel something. That's really where I guess get off, or whatever you want to call it. Like basically, witnessing someone have a reaction to something you've created, I just think is so amazing. And so if you can do that in whatever form, it's so exciting to me. So yeah.
Once you finish living life, what did trying to sell the movie teach you about the business?
Yeah, so I had finished the film, and I didn't know anyone in Hollywood or LA or anything like that. I was living in Seattle, where I grew up, and I had just barely been able to kind of put the finishing touches on the film, but we still didn't really have a mixed film. There were still components missing because I didn't have all the money to kind of finish it fully. And so I had this kind of friend in Seattle who was kind of helping produce, who I'd met, and he said he had seen this article in like Variety or Hollywood Reporter, and it was basically an advertisement from a film distributor saying like, hey, we're looking for indie films to help finish and release. If you could even believe this.
Oh,
like
wow.
in the classified section or something in the back of the physical magazine, And he told me that he said he sent a DVD copy down to this address, and I was like, you're crazy. There's no way. Like, this is either a scam or like this is not real. That's not how films get distributed. But then, this is a totally true story. But then literally on the day I was graduating from high school, I got a call from his number in LA, and they're like, we saw your film. Someone sent us this DVD, and we want to like pick up the film and distribute it and pay to finish it. And I was just
Wow.
this can't be real. But it was, and so that's what happened. And
How cool.
I mean, this would never happen nowadays. And this distributor wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't legit, but it doesn't exist anymore. It did a few films for a few years and then went away. But for me, it was perfect. They literally paid to finish the film. They released it in theaters in a few cities, and they put it out there. I think they were just looking for films, and this, worked for them. And they did like the idea that this young kid had made this movie and the kind of story they could build around that, which they did. So, I mean, everything is obviously completely changed now, because nowadays I could have just put the film online and probably reached just as many people or whatever myself. But back then, you couldn't even put a feature film on the internet back when I made this movie, 2003, 2004. So, yeah, it's a pretty crazy story and experience, but definitely something I won't ever forget.
And sorry, they called on a cell phone? Like, were you at the
No,
graduation?
I don't think even had a cell phone. Like, I think they called my house. Basically, my parents answered, or something. And I was about to go to my graduation, though, my high school graduation. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I get when you went to accept that degree, I'm sure you had a huge smile on your face. You're like, wow, this is pretty cool.
It was crazy. And then a few weeks later, I literally packed up and moved to LA because they wanted me to come down to help kind of do some re-editing on the film and finishing it up. And so that's what I did as like an 18-year-old kid, just having graduated. I drove down to LA by myself and spent the next year basically. First, we kind of did some changes to the film. Then they did the final mixing and the color correction. And then they transferred it to film, because back then, again, you couldn't even play a movie in the theater without it being on 35mm film. And so they transferred this movie we'd shot onto film. And then it got into a couple festivals and had a few, opportunities like that. But it was just a whirlwind. And, it definitely gave me this little window into kind of how it works to distribute a film, making the poster, doing the promotion, doing some press. And this was all as like a 18-year-old kid who had just made this random little film thinking nothing would happen from it, that it was just my experience of film school. But it became that. It became even more continuation of that side of things. So I don't think something like this would ever happen nowadays. And the film, I mean, you can find the film. I think it's on like Amazon maybe right now or something. Like it's not a film I would recommend you watch, but I think at the time it fit, it fit the need of what they were looking for and worked, But more than anything, it just was an amazing life experience and an incredible story.
And that's what got you down to Los Angeles was
Yeah.
this film?
Yeah, exactly. So I moved there for that, and then I spent the next few years, after the film had come out, I started writing something else, but then I just kind of started, living there, making friends, and just kind of, I guess, living my own life a little bit more. And then what started happening is I started getting emails from other young filmmakers who had kind of heard about my film now that there had been some press. Maybe they'd seen it in whatever city it had played in. And they started reaching out to me, asking if I could watch their film or if I could help them out. And I started realizing, this was like 2005 probably when the film came out. This was even before, I think Facebook hadn't even existed yet. This was MySpace era maybe. But like, it was very hard to kind of connect with other people around the world, let alone probably even in your own city that had the same interests or passions unless you physically had met them, right? And so I really didn't have a lot of other connections to young filmmakers. I didn't know how many were out there. And at the time, there was no film festival for young directors. There was, really no way to kind of meet other young filmmakers. So I started getting all these emails from young filmmakers, and it made me realize that, there really should be something like this for young filmmakers to kind of showcase their films, maybe a film festival for young directors. And but that didn't exist. So I guess as I was kind of living in LA, had just made this film a few years earlier, didn't really have anything else going on. I thought, okay, maybe I should just do a little side project and try this for a little mini festival and see what happens. And so that's what I ended up deciding to do. I actually moved back to Seattle just because I knew it would be easier to start something like that in a town I was from and knew all the people and everything. And so I moved back to Seattle, and I thought I'd just do this for a year, and I'd come back to LA and go back to working on my own, pursuing my own career. And what happened was we got hundreds of submissions from all over the world, from all these young directors. I'm talking like at the time it was 21 and younger was the age, and it was mind blowing because up until that point I'd been kind of so isolated and didn't think there was that many other young filmmakers trying to do this just like me out there. And it was the opposite. There were so many. And so I kind of realized like, okay, this could become a huge thing. This could be a really wonderful thing if I wanted to do this. But I don't think I could do this while also trying to pursue my own career still. And so I basically had to make a decision, what I should do. And I decided that, this was just too important of a thing, I think, to exist. And it had so much, you could just feel the momentum, I guess, that was behind it. And so I decided to basically take a pause in my own film career pursuing, and I decided to kind of start and run this film festival for young directors. And that's what I did for the next basically 7-8 years after that.
So how long, you'd been in LA, you said about a year when you started getting these emails?
Yeah, I think a year or two, yeah.
Sorry, where were you staying? If you don't, just the town that you were staying
in LA?
Yeah.
I was living in like Santa Monica at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you packed up your apartment or wherever you were, and then headed back, I don't know, up the 5 or however, whatever route, was this a feeling of defeat or a feeling of excitement driving back home?
I think it was a little bit of both, but it didn't feel, I guess because I knew I was going there to go and do this film festival, I was excited because I had this project that I knew I wanted to go start, and that was already I was already getting submissions in. I think I'd already kind of started the pre-planning from LA, so I knew I'd picked a date. Like it was already a thing that was going to happen, basically. And so I was working on it, but I think there was an element of like, should I be doing this? This isn't going to help me personally. Like I should be focusing on my own career, but I think just it just felt like the kind of the right thing to do, and just felt super exciting. And but again, I was thinking I would do this for a year. The festival probably wouldn't be that big, and then I would come back, and be back soon. So I think I even had kept some stuff in storage down there, thinking I was going to come back. And so it was. It wasn't the typical like, okay, I failed and I'm going back, but it was more like, I guess here's the next adventure. And I was still only 20, 21 years old probably at the time. So it was still so young, honestly, for everything I was doing at the time.
Right. Wow, that's really cool. So you get back home and then you end up staying 7-8 years?
Yeah, I think I stayed probably about 7 or 8 years. So when I first moved back, I moved back in with my parents basically, because I knew I wasn't going to make any money running this film festival, at least at first. And so for the first year, I basically did everything. I watched all the films myself, programmed the whole festival. I had to raise money to put the festival together, so I started going to like corporate sponsors. I would just hit them up on like LinkedIn or something and just pitch them, be like, "Hey, I'm starting this film festival. It's all young directors, and the audience that's going to come is going to all be pretty young people, which is kind of, those people aren't coming to movies right now, you know?" And so I don't know. I guess I put together this good little pitch, and I started getting actual sponsors to help us pay for this festival. And I mean, it was basically just like making a movie. And so I think all the skills that I'd learned while making this feature a few years earlier, I was able to now use to put together this film festival, because it was the same thing. You have to raise the money, you have to put the people together, you have to like do all the actually planning and execution for this big event or whatever, the big shoot or whatever you want to have it be. And that's what I did. So I just threw everything at it and, worked nonstop, basically put all of my energy and life into it. And it was a huge hit. The festival was packed the first year, and it was just like this. It was so obvious that this could be something so big and was going to be something so important. I mean, I bet probably what they felt like in the early days of like a Sundance or something like that. I mean, this is what it felt like, because there wasn't anything like that for this audience of filmmakers. There was nothing, and there was no category at any of the big festivals for youth films or anything like there is even now. There was nothing. And so I think what no one realized, including myself, was just that around the world there was thousands of these young filmmakers, but just didn't have a place to show their films, and this was giving them that opportunity. And so from there it just exploded, and every year we got more and more submissions. We started getting thousands of submissions, and the festival grew to more days, and soon, I think by 4 years into it, there was 12,000 people coming to see these films every weekend in Seattle. Short films basically by young directors, and it was an incredible thing. I got to meet filmmakers from all over the world. They would come out just like any other festival. They would fly out to Seattle for the festival, and I think what was so special was they all got to meet each other. So the same experience I had, whereas like I don't know any other young filmmakers really, they all had that same experience, but they got to actually meet each other at the festival and kind of share stories. And we started doing panels and workshops and all that kind of stuff. And so, nowadays that probably exists so much more online. And so I think a physical festival like that is probably even less maybe important than it was back then. But back then, this was such the early days of online and connecting, that this was so important, and really I think was the perfect timing for what needed to exist and didn't exist. And it was just, everything kind of aligned, and it was a really special thing.
Right, and I think too, DSLRs started coming out a little bit past that point, correct?
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, the technology was changing, so we could have more and more people making films. It wasn't even like 3 years earlier when I was making my feature. You could now shoot a film with a DSLR, with a cheaper camera, and have it look good, right? I don't think yet you could start filming yet quite on the iPhone at this time in the early days of the festival, but still, it was just right around the corner. It was that kind of idea that it was much easier for almost anyone to make a film, and that definitely changed everything, because we started getting films from filmmakers of all walks of life. It was no longer the rich kids from USC, no offense to them, but those kind of people that maybe originally could only make films that looked good, right? Now it was people from all over the world. I mean, every walk of life, every kind of person was able to make a film now and tell their story. And it was pretty amazing, the kind of films and the stories and the filmmakers we got to showcase over the years. And the festival still exists. It's in its 15th year now. I personally have left, and it's on its own, but it's still going strong and showing films every year.
And too, YouTube had just started coming out, and Vimeo, Dailymotion, things like that. So was that helpful in the sense that now you could actually see these trailers online?
For sure,
rather
yeah.
than sending it?
Also with the festival, we were one of the first festivals really to actually use kind of digital submissions, because we were mostly dealing with short films. We started collecting films over the internet, which I know nowadays probably sounds crazy, but even back then you had to mail in a DVD to a festival or something like that, And but we started using different platforms to basically kind of collect these films digitally, which again I think also allowed us to reach people from all over the world that maybe couldn't mail a DVD, around the world or whatever, to some random address in Seattle. And Yeah, no, I mean, it was right at that era where everything was changing. I mean, this was 2007, 2008 was the first year of the festival. And that was when, one was when big crash was happening. So the economy was struggling. And so raising the money was hard. But at the same time, technology and everything was also changing so rapidly fast, and the way we were experiencing things. And so I think it was just an exciting time, even though it was a struggling time for the country. It was also just a very exciting time, I think, with just all the changes in technology and tech companies and everything kind of coming up right then. And so we kind of fit nicely, I guess, into all of that.
Wasn't just Tom from MySpace.
Exactly, yeah.
At what point did running Nifty become overwhelming, maybe? Because so many people, it was a good problem to have, but in some ways you had to bring on new people to help.
For sure. It was probably pretty much overwhelming from the beginning, but after the first year or two, I think it was beyond the point where I could just physically do everything myself, you know? I mean, again, I was getting my parents to help. My mom was a huge help in the first few years, almost a co-founder with me practically. And just, again, kind of like the movie where they were like, I said, I'm going to do this. And they were like, okay, sure. But, you know, kind of knew that I was going to go at it. And so they, of course, came in to help as I was struggling and just overwhelmed by trying to pull this all off. So they were a huge help. But then, yeah, I think after the first couple of festivals, we finally were able to get a few sponsors, get some grants, and able to start paying a small salary to me, but also start paying enough money to hire at least people seasonally. And then from there, we were able to expand to more, a couple other year-round people, and, you know, slowly kind of grew it into an actual kind of organization that could put together this event. And then from there, we also started doing some year-round programming and some other things beyond just the physical 3-day festival or whatever. But it was like making a couple feature films in one probably every year. I mean, just the amount of work. It seems crazy to think you'd spend a whole year putting on a 4-day event, but it's just, there's so much from marketing, just even to find the filmmakers, right? To find these films, we would, again, back in the day, we would physically mail like a flyer or poster to thousands of film schools and colleges all over the country. We would search online where we could to find ones internationally, you know, and then we would have to start screening these films and processing that, and then programming them together, and then meanwhile raising all the money on the side. And then the festival had parties and events and other things like that. So it was this huge undertaking, and it was definitely overwhelming. But again, it was just like making a movie. I mean, it was the same kind of skills as producing a movie would be producing in a big event like this. So it was something I was, I guess, comfortable with, but it was definitely a lot of work. And I think eventually, after probably the 5th or 6th year, I kind of realized, as amazing as this was and as incredible as it had been for me personally, that I wanted to get back to making stuff myself. And so I kind of eventually started trying to work to hiring other people to kind of take over and let me kind of transition out of the festival. And at the same time, I had started doing commercials. Basically, the sponsors that I had found to put together to fund the festival, they had been asking for like, hey, could we play our commercials, our TV commercials at the film festival as part of our sponsorship? And we did that the first year, but it was kind of awkward because you were going to this really creative, wonderful film festival with cool short films, but then you'd see like a TV commercial before it, you know, and it just didn't feel right. And so the next year, I told one of our sponsors, like, hey, why don't you let me make like a custom commercial for you for our festival and kind of speak to this young audience, you know? And it won't cost you anything. Like, we'll just do it out of the money you're going to give us anyways. Like, we'll call in some favors. Like, we're filmmakers. We know how to make a commercial, right? And we did that, and it was a huge success. It was actually for Volvo cars that we did that for the first year, who had become a pretty big sponsor of us. And we did one every year since, basically, afterwards. And other sponsors started asking for it. And so even though it wasn't what I was trying to do, it accidentally kind of created this commercial reel for myself, because I was the one also directing these commercials because it was for the festival. And so I basically kind of saw this path to where I could maybe transition out of doing the festival and go back to filmmaking via making commercials. And so that's kind of what I did. And it wasn't just like, obviously I was so lucky because I had this festival and something I could be doing, you know, while I was also pursuing the commercial. So I didn't have to just like one day switch it off and go on to the next thing, right? Cold. But I could kind of like tiptoe in and kind of go back and forth a little bit. And that's kind of what I did over maybe a course of 4 years or so, kind of transitioning, I guess, into the different area. And then that's kind of from there, I ended up really doing commercials ever since then. Almost, that's been probably 10 years now. I've been doing that as my kind of, I guess, way of living and directing full time, but doing commercials.
Were there ever incidents where the venue fell through or something happened, or again, the I don't know if you're using DCP or what you were using to play but things weren't working even though you tested them?
For sure.
Good times.
Yeah, no, there was always challenges. I mean, our very first year, we were playing off of a DVD, and I remember it had so many issues with playback because, you know, back then if you were making your own DVD, sometimes it would be a bad reader or something, and the films were skipping, and it was a whole disaster. But we kind of started doing little skits and kind of entertaining the audience, and it actually had this great energy because it was so kind of unexpected. It was almost like a screening at someone's house, you know, and even though it feels like it would be awkward, it somehow added to the charm, I guess, of the festival. And from then on, I never played off any DVDs anymore because I was so scared. So we started making basically like custom QuickTime files of the whole string of movies and playing off that. So we never had too many technical issues because we kind of learned our lesson. But it was always, the biggest challenge really more than anything was just finding the money. You know, it really was like making a movie where in order to pull it off, you had to kind of be like, okay, we're going to go on this date and it's just going to happen and we're going to make it happen, right? And it was the same with the festival where every year every year was the same weekend, but we'd basically know we had the festival, you know, the last weekend of April every year, and we didn't have any of the money really to put it together. So we'd have to then spend that whole year trying to basically raise the money to make it happen. But of course, you know, no one would want to pay out long times in advance. So it would be, you know, a few weeks out even sometimes, and I would still be trying to get the last bit of money to pull the festival together. We'd have to maybe make a deposit on a venue, but not knowing we could even pay for it. So it was just a lot of like gambling and risking, but just kind of having to know we would put it together. And it always worked out because I think with anything like this, it always does really. And obviously there's tons of luck, but I think if you just dive into something and you put all your energy into it, you can figure out a way to make it happen. You know, maybe you got to make compromises, of course, along the way, which we did. But I think there's just something about just going in on going 110% on something, and you'll figure out a way. You'll find a way.
So did you sell the festival? What was the turning point where you said, I really want to make these films and do the commercial?
Yeah, so we founded the festival as a nonprofit. So I didn't like even physically own it legally. It was, you know, I was a board member and I was the founding executive director or whatever of it, but it wasn't something I could really sell. It was more something that we had to just find someone to take over. It was almost like part of the community, I guess, you know? And so I eventually found someone else to kind of take over as the director and run it. And I stayed on the board and kind of helped for a few years to kind of hopefully see it transition. So I don't have any kind of real involvement anymore other than just being a supporter of it and going to it whenever I can. But yeah, it was more just about me kind of figuring out, okay, how could I go? I think for a few years I went from being the executive director to then I found someone else to do that, and I was just doing the artistic side, like I was just helping with picking the films, and I could take that extra time to go make commercials and do other stuff. So I think over a couple of years I just kind of did less and less of the festival while I could do more and more of the commercials, hopefully. And you know, I didn't have some sort of calculated plan. It was kind of figuring it out as I went. And, you know, it was not easy because obviously getting into commercial directing is not easy at all. I mean, one is you have to have you almost already kind of need to have the work even before they hire you. So a lot of times, even though I had shot a few commercials, I needed to maybe make some other spec things or shoot some more stuff, you know, and it was constantly just having to kind of prove that I could go and do this. And, you know, it was never easy, but, again, I think it's just something where if you go all in on it and kind of keep pursuing it, you can find a way.
So with a nonprofit, you're not having an LLC, it's a 50.
Yeah, it's a 501c3. Yeah.
Okay. And so it's similar paperwork that you're filling out for the most part? And
yeah, I mean, to actually get that 501c3 status from the government, you have to like go through some processes to get that, you know, because then people can make donations tax deductible. So there's some like elements involved because they don't want to just give it to anybody who's not actually doing something. It's supposed to be for the greater good or whatever, and actually not for profit making, but for creating something. And so, yeah, it's kind of a process. But once you kind of get that going, it opens you up to be able to get grants and other kind of sources of funding, kind of to put it together.
And so then, as sort of a board member of a charity or a 501c3, a nonprofit,
Yeah.
then you can turn over the reins. You're not really selling it; you're just turning over the reins.
Yeah, you're not selling it because it was never even. It was like no one's. It's hard to describe. Like a nonprofit is literally not owned by anyone. It's an entity, and you can have managers of it. But if it makes money, I don't get to just like take that money. Like it's its entity's money. Its entity is its own thing. And so a nonprofit is kind of like for the greater good, you know. And so you can still decide who takes control of it, but it's kind of belongs to no one and everyone at the same time, you know. And I guess that's kind of the good and bad of starting it that way. Where I didn't actually have total control. So once I left, I couldn't really control it anymore, you know, and I struggled with that too, because of course it was like my child. I wanted to see it always succeed, you know, but then the cool part is it gave everyone that then took over that kind of ownership and that feeling that they were part of this too, you know, because it was now their baby, I guess. And so, yeah.
How many film submissions did you watch total from your running Nifty?
I think I probably watched nearly 10,000 films, probably. I mean, a lot. We were getting thousands of submissions. In the first few years, I was watching every single one of them. Eventually, we got more people involved to do, especially pre-screening, and kind of start, I don't want to say eliminating, but kind of eliminating films. But we were always very fair. We had multiple people watch every film, so it wasn't just like one person deciding on it. But yeah, I watched a ton of films while doing the festival, and I think it definitely had an impact on me because, for one, I saw a lot of really bad films, of course, and so I saw what not to do and not how to learn from that. And then I saw every once in a while saw some incredible movies that were just like, I was mind blown. I was like, how did someone my age make this, you know? And so it was probably, again, this like amazing, almost film school like experience, but in an even more probably modern way of just watching all these films from all over the world of all different kinds, raw and super professional, and kind of getting, on one hand, analyzing them as a viewer and being like, would people like this and should this be in the festival? But also as a filmmaker being like, wow, look what they did, or look what they did and how we should not do that. And so it probably, I'm sure, contributed a lot in terms of expanding my filmmaking, you know, knowledge and abilities after watching so many films for so many years.
So then what do you think makes a bad movie? What were some of the things where you could almost tell within the first maybe 30 seconds?
I think it was just, it was not telling an authentic story, you know, someone trying to copy something that they had seen already, like make an action spoof on some movie they liked, you know, or doing something, probably the mistakes we all do, which is like trying to copy something and not having any sort of original kind of idea with it. And I think too, just sometimes trying to do maybe too much, because we had plenty of films that were very simple, made with no money, and sometimes those were some of the best films. But then you had someone who was maybe trying to do something too ambitious for what the resources they had. Maybe there was always issues with acting, of course, you know, performances, because you're probably limited on who you can get. There was technical challenges, but I honestly don't think the technical ability of a film is always really the best judge of it. I mean, you could have a really raw film that doesn't have the most amazing cinematography or whatever, but if it has a really great story, it can be super successful. So I think it was always just trying to find those stories that were captivating, and whether that was a documentary or a short film or whatever, but yeah, it was just kind of trying to find those just really captivating stories.
From your time with Nifty, what did you see with the submissions that you found really made a film satisfying, any genre?
I think what makes a film satisfying is when it makes you feel something. And, you know, whatever that is, whether it's a sad feeling, a happy feeling, being scared, whatever, I think that was when I knew we had a good film, was when I was, you know, after watching hundreds, if not thousands of films, you kind of get a little numb sometimes, but then you turn one on while screening them for the festival and it would just captivate you and grab your attention and make you feel something. And if it can make you feel something after watching tons of other films and kind of being bored and over over that, then you know it's probably going to captivate everyone else. And so that's kind of what I was always looking for, was what are those just really compelling films that would make me feel something, whatever that was. And I think that's the same with anything now, and that's what I try to think about when I make a film too, is just, how can I make people feel something? And I think for me, that was always kind of trying to tap into emotion, because that's just kind of what I always went to. For some people, it might be comedy or something else, but I think if you can do that, you can make a great film.
What about a non-Nifty submission? What was one that made you feel something, however old you were?
As a kid, my parents actually would either take me to a lot of movies, or we had a video store near our house, and so we would rent a lot of films. And it was like an independent video store, so we would sometimes find movies that wouldn't be a blockbuster or something like that. And so I actually probably had a pretty good movie experience as a kid, watching probably a lot of movies that were more older than I really was, like not necessarily kid movies, but I remember being pretty young and watching To Kill a Mockingbird. And I remember at first my mom had rented it, and she said, you have to watch this. And we did, but it was in black and white. And for the first few minutes, I was like, this is going to be boring. Like, what is this? Like, I was very young at the time. But then within probably the first 5 minutes, I was totally hooked, because it is such a captivating story, right? It has great characters. It also, there was these young kids in the movie, which I was probably the same age as them on the screen. And so I think that hooked me. And so I think it's the same idea, where if a movie can grab you and grab at your emotions or captivate you in some way, it's going to have you. And then obviously from there, you still have to have the rest of the film be compelling, good acting, good storytelling otherwise. But I think that's just so important, is just to have something that's going to grab people and pull you in.
Any success stories with Nifty that really stand out, like whether it was a film that just drew you in, or maybe a filmmaker that you were so compelled by their story, their real story?
Definitely. I think I saw so many amazing films over the many years I was running the festival. One in particular was this young female filmmaker from Afghanistan, and she had pulled off making this film, and it was a documentary kind of about her life. And this was in, I don't know, late 2010s, I guess. I don't know. Obviously, this was like wars were going on all over in that area, and it was just so profound, I guess, to kind of see this story from someone your own age from around the world. And then she actually came out to the festival, and we got to meet her, which was incredible. And there was so many other interesting stories like that. There was, I think especially the documentaries at our festival were so compelling, just because they were so personal and real and raw. And so, we had amazing short narrative films also all the time, but the documentaries were just so special, because they were coming from basically someone your own age, telling usually some really profound, amazing story from their life. And so those were always just so compelling and captivating. And we were able to find films from really all over the world and all walks of life. And it was just always exciting, really, every time we would get a submission in and see kind of what this story was. And, a lot of our filmmakers have gone on to do big things. A couple of them made feature films. We had a short documentary in the festival several years back that won the Oscar for Best Short Documentary that year. So it's been kind of this great, I guess, you could just call it like a farm team or whatever, I guess, for finding these filmmakers and helping them develop themselves. But of course, not every filmmaker goes on and has a big success story. Most of the filmmakers, if you touched with them now, like, they probably won't even be still directing, the reality is it's just obviously very hard, and not everyone that makes a film when they're in their early 20s ends up becoming a director, but a lot of them are working in the industry somewhere, or they're just doing something else in their life that is creative, and they're using their skills probably as a filmmaker to kind of still tell stories in some way, whether it's marketing or whatever. And so I think that's the big thing, is that no matter what happens, I think a lot of anyone who can kind of put together a film and kind of go down that path, it's just such a great experience for for kind of learning about yourself, but also about how to kind of like tell a story and captivate people. And I just think it's a great skill in life that you can use one way or the other.
Did you see where filmmakers who were overseas maybe, did you realize, I guess, what privilege we have here in terms of being able to make something, you know, withstanding certain laws, whereas in other countries probably much, much different, much more fear?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was definitely films at times. We had a few of our filmmakers, especially from the Middle East, who would get into our festival, but then they wouldn't even be able to travel necessarily to the U.S. to attend the festival. Sometimes that was because of their own country. Other times it was because the U.S. wouldn't let them in. And it was definitely a time period too. Again, it was like the internet was starting to take off more. I mean, this was like Facebook and social media was existing, but it still was like the world wasn't as close and connected as it is now. And it was always so captivating when we would get to meet these young filmmakers from around the world and hear firsthand from them just their experiences of their everyday life, because and that was what was so special about the festival, is you would literally have everyone from a very privileged, probably wealthy family to someone who was dirt poor, and we had to basically raise money to bring them out to the festival, and we did that in some cases, and so, but we all were the same in the end of the day because we were all filmmakers just trying to tell stories. And it was such a special thing to kind of see everyone from all walks of life interacting and getting to kind of share and learn from each other, and I think, more than anything, I think most young people will understand this because just in general, they're more exposed to people probably from around the world. But I think you kind of it just makes you realize how similar everyone is, and how most of the conflicts and problems would probably be solved if we were all just like hanging out with each other a lot more. But
Making movies.
Yeah, exactly.
How much money has the first feature that you made, Living Life, made total?
It probably hasn't made really barely any money. I mean, it was, they paid a small fee to me to go kind of work on it when they first picked it up, and they paid to finish it and put it on film and release it and market it. But I don't think they ever even made their money back on it. I mean, it had a small theatrical release in a couple cities. It played, on, I think, internationally in a few countries and a few TV markets. But the distributor was, they were kind of this tiny little indie distributor. At the time back then, there was all these little companies popping up. And I think they meant well, but I don't think they really knew how to kind of get a film out there. And so I don't think it ended up really making very much money for them. I definitely didn't recoup the money that my parents had given me to make the movie. But again, for me, it was never about that. I mean, they were never expecting that in the first place. I mean, it wasn't like an investment either. It was the money I would have used. They would have given me if I had, gone to pay to a film school or something, right? And so, I don't think it made money, but it obviously made just so much for me in terms of it's what gave me the inspiration to start this film festival for young filmmakers, which then led to starting to do commercials, which then led me back to making a film again. And so it was definitely a life-changing experience. Just an incredible thing that I was able to pull off at such a young age.
Do you think a filmmaker should expect to make money or recoup their costs for their first feature film?
It's hard to say, I mean, I think that it all probably depends on the scale and size of the film. I mean, I think that ideally, you start something small and you build from there. And obviously, things are changing all the time. I think budgets are getting smaller because they're being forced to be, because people are paying less for them, distributors are. But I think, especially if you're going to make a movie for any sort of larger amount of money that isn't your own money, you should try to have the intention be to make money, because you don't want to just be taking people's money and with no intention to make it back, obviously. But I think the best thing would be to kind of start something small that you could pull off and make good, but then would have the ability to maybe make some money back. I mean, maybe you could find a contained film that would only cost $100,000 or $200,000 or something, which is still a lot of money, but it's probably a more realistic amount of money that you could make back versus a couple $1 million, even if you could get that money, And so, but I think to make money personally as a filmmaker, that's always a long shot. I think that's multiple films in being very successful when you would ever do that. I mean, I think we're at this stage for most filmmakers, you're just lucky to have been able to make the film. And if anything happens beyond that, that's just, a wonderful dream.
And have it shown in theaters as well. I mean, that's a rarity too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially now more than ever, it's rare to get something in the theater. And if you'd asked me several years ago, I probably would have been like, that's the ultimate thing. Now, it's hard to even say, right? Because you probably have a lot better reach if you were on something like Netflix. It's not as theatrical, and there's a lot of issues probably with some of that distribution, because it's like it's on there and it gets lost, right? It's not very curated, but it's hard to say. I think there's gonna be a lot of change in the next few years in terms of how people see films and what is the best way to get it out to people. But of course, I like nothing more than being in a theater with a bunch of people and watching it and kind of feeling it with them. So I would love to always be able to have a film in a theater for sure.
So the filmmaker quandary of you want to make films, you may or may not make a living at it. You may or may not have to take other jobs. What are your thoughts on that? What's your advice to other filmmakers?
It's definitely the hardest thing about being a filmmaker, right? I mean, if you probably picked any other career and you had spent a decade working on it and were really good at it, you'd probably be really successful and have a good life, whether it was a doctor or a business or whatever, right? Whereas a filmmaker, you could do that and you could still be pretty poor after being pretty successful, right? Or struggling to get by. And so I think it's probably one of the hardest careers you could ever pick, because even when you get successful, it's still, you got to keep going, right? So it's definitely not for people that want the easiest life, of course, but I think if you are that kind of person, and I'm one of those people, there's nothing else I would do. I wouldn't know what I would do if I couldn't make movies, And so one way or the other, I know I'm going to figure out how to do it. And the hope is that you can kind of keep building and get bigger. I think things like commercials and branded kind of stuff is a really good way for filmmakers to try to make money and make a living doing filmmaking, because it is an actual business there where you get paid, to go and make something, but you're still telling stories. You're still being a filmmaker. So I mean, that's the path I kind of took to be able to kind of support myself while not having a day job or whatever. So that's not easy to get into that either, but I think that's kind of one way to go about it. But on the other hand, if you also want to be a writer or something like that, maybe you should take a normal job and then spend your free time, or the time you can take off because of that job to then just write or to focus on that. So I don't know if there's one perfect way, but it's definitely not an easy career. And I don't think you should go into it thinking you're going to become rich and famous, but because you want to do this because it's what you love.
It sounds like you have to be prepared to be very resourceful and just not needing everything spelled out for you. It sounds like you've pieced together a lot of things on your own.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just all about putting together that puzzle of how you can pull something off, and then at the same time how you can kind of make a living, and that still amounts for me. I mean, I've just made a film, but I still have to do commercials too. I'm trying to write other stuff, so I don't think it ever stops. It's always just kind of this I don't know what you would call it, this dance, I guess, of trying to figure that out. But yeah, I don't know. I couldn't do anything else. I know that.
Did you ever have a day job for a short time?
Never like a traditional day job. I mean, the closest thing was running this film festival, which was a day job. I'd go in there every day and do it. We had an office for a while. I mean, so that was my day job, but it was different because I had created it and it was something I was super excited about it. I don't think I could be the person who sits in the office and works for someone else. That's just not me, especially at this point. I would figure out something else I would have to do, if that was what I had to go. But again, that just kind of fits with my personality, which is I don't like to be forced to do something. I want to just go and make something. So I think I would rather I don't know, become a tour guide in some other country, or I don't know, do something totally random that wasn't being kind of controlled and forced into a career. But yeah.
Magician?
Yeah, maybe go back to that.
What advice would you give to 17, 18, 19-year-olds on making their first feature film?
I think if you were a really young, kind of late teenage, early 20s, trying to make a feature film, I think my first advice would be, is that actually the best thing to do? That's what I did. And it was the perfect thing, I guess, for me, because it led me to where I am now. But I just wonder, is it what's really going to help you the most? And so I think if you have an incredible feature script that is super personal and is something that could be made at a realistic budget and you feel really confident in, then go do that for sure. But maybe it would be better to make a short film or a proof of concept, or kind of develop your skills a little bit more. I think I had this idea when I was that age that I just had to make a feature film because that's what would legitimize me or allow me to kind of go make the next thing. And I think that was partly just because of the era, because short films weren't really available, because this was before kind of online platforms to watch them or anything like that. And so to be a filmmaker was to make a feature film. But I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think that you can make a short film and it can create other opportunities. I mean, even in the feature I just made, in order to allow me to make this, I made a short film as a proof of concept, and so and that was essential. I had to do that. I don't think I would have been able to do it without that. And so I think my advice would just be to really make sure, if you're going to put in all the energy, is that the right thing? The other side of that is, I know a lot of people that just make short film after short film and never do a feature or never take that next step. So I also don't think you should just get stuck, because it's a huge amount of work to do any kind of film, whether it's a short film or a feature film. It's a huge amount of work. So I think it's just about figuring out what is going to help you the most excel and kind of make the next project from there. And if that means making a feature, then go do it. But maybe it means also pulling back a little bit and taking time to write that really compelling feature while you make a short or something else or a documentary. I think that's, if I was giving this advice to myself, maybe we just slow down and pull back even, and I don't mean that and lose that excitement and that energy, but just be a little bit more strategic, I guess, about what you're going to go make. I don't know. That's not what I did, so it's funny that I'm saying that advice to people, but I did the complete opposite. I just dove in and did it. But I feel like the more sane advice would be to kind of take it a little slower.
Well, the environment has changed since 2003 when
For sure.
Your story is very unique. I think it's very interesting. But I mean, to have, this thing in the back of the Variety or whatever publication that was to say, hey, we're looking for this. The whole thing is a very interesting journey. But for today's temperament and costs and everything. But can people get stuck in this sort of short film, just making one after another and never progressing, or is that not a bad thing?
I mean, I think people can definitely get stuck making short film after short film. I think if your intent is not to really become a career filmmaker, but just, a lot of people make films, short films, and they have regular jobs, they have other things in their life. They just love making films, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, people should keep doing that. I mean, everyone should make a story if they're compelled to do it. But I think if you really want to be a director as your career, making a short film one after the other forever is either a sign that if it's not getting you somewhere else, then maybe there's problems with your filmmaking, or your something there is not working, or you need to reshift your focus. Maybe it's finding a story that's even more personal or compelling, or it's finding something someone else wrote if you're not the stronger writer, or maybe it's making a documentary. I don't know. Or maybe it's taking that leap to go then try to do a feature. It's really hard because it's like there's not one perfect path, and so it's hard to say. But I definitely think you want to kind of have some sort of momentum going, and if that's not happening, maybe you got to figure out a way to shift it up. Yeah.
What is a proof of concept short film?
A proof of concept short film is basically making a short, or it could be something even like a teaser or a trailer, but basically showing what you can do and what you want to do in the feature version. So in my case, I had written this feature script that I wanted to go make, but I had made this first feature when I was 17. I was now, 34 at the time when I was trying to make this feature. And I didn't really have any kind of recent narrative work to show. I had been making commercials for the last almost 10 years, but a lot of that isn't really transferable to narrative storytelling in the same way. And so I knew I needed to basically prove, not necessarily to myself, but to the people that were going to fund this film, that I could make this film. And a lot of people were telling me that too. And so I decided to basically make a short film kind of inspired from my feature that would show the style and the tone and kind of the vibe I was going for, and then showcase my filmmaking as a director. And so I think that is super important for young filmmakers, because unless you have a whole collection of really great short films, and even if you do, if it's a different style or tone than the feature, a lot of times people just won't have the faith that you can do that, right? And that's a separate issue. In general, Hollywood probably should have a lot more faith in people and take some more risks, but unfortunately they don't. And so you really kind of have to prove to people that you can do this. And so for me to get my feature off the ground, it was essential to have made this proof of concept, because it was probably a 12, 15-minute long film. I had taken kind of a character from the feature and wrote a kind of backstory for them. And it wasn't a scene from the film. It wasn't a teaser, but it was kind of like almost a prequel to the feature, of kind of an origin story of one of the characters in the feature. And so it could be its own standalone thing. The nice thing about doing that way is it could be its own short. It could live on its own. Even if the feature never happened or did happen, it could still exist. It wasn't like a teaser or a trailer or something like that. It was a full film, short film. But it was totally in alignment to the feature in terms of the cinematography, the pacing, the kind of acting, just the whole style I was trying to create, and showed that I could pull off these scenes, and it had a little bit of action, but it kind of showed the kind of my ability as a director. And it just opened up so many more doors in terms of people don't want to read scripts, everyone has a script. Even if yours is good, they still don't want to read it probably, because they don't think it's good. And so, but if you can show them, if you can send them a link and show them a 12 or 15-minute short film that's compelling and has some talent to it, then they'll be like, okay, that's actually pretty good. Actually, I will read this script now. And then that's what kind of started to, for me, build more and more opportunities for getting my feature made, was then people would watch the short and then they would read the script. And I also had like a deck that I went with along all this, where it was like, it was my kind of vision and take for how to make the movie in terms of breaking down the cinematography, the music, the editing, the same kind of skills I learned from making commercials, where you have to kind of make a treatment or a pitch for why you should direct a commercial. It was that same kind of thing, but for my own movie, of like, what it would look and feel like. So together, that was kind of my package I would send to people. And I didn't have any agent or manager or barely knew anyone. I was just kind of taking any kind of connections and relationships I did have and seeing where it could go from there. And it took a long time. It took several years. And eventually someone would get it and they'd pass it on to somebody else. And in my case, a producer saw the short, really liked it. Then he read the script. He really liked that. And he brought in his casting director that he works with all the time. And together they were able to get the script out to some of the bigger agencies. And that's eventually how we got to Lucy Hale, who stars in the film. And that's then who gave us the ability to get the film made, because, her name has value, and then it becomes an actual kind of a real thing. And so none of that would have happened without this proof of concept short film.
So was the backstory about, was it Ellie? Is that her character?
No, it was one of the other characters. It was the Guillermo. Oh. It was the guy who was the character who in the feature is living in the U.S. and receives the drugs that come via this ultralight airplane into the U.S. But in the short, it was kind of how he got to the U.S. He was the guy flying the plane in that case, but kind of has to take over. He has to basically kill the guy and replace him and take over and be the permanent guy and leave his family behind and be that guy in the U.S. now. And so it didn't really have a story connection so much to the feature, but it just had that kind of world connection and that kind of tone connection and everything like that.
What comes first, a proof of concept short or a screenplay?
I think the screenplay would have to come first, because without the screenplay, a proof of concept would just be making a short film, a regular short film, which is fine. You could use that still to help your career and build you the next thing. But really the point of a proof of concept is to show that you can then make this kind of style or this kind of film that you're trying to make. And I'm talking about in this situation, if you're a writer or director like I am, where I had written this script and I knew I wanted to direct it. I didn't want to just have someone else make this. I wrote this really in order to direct it. And so, yeah, I think it always has to start with the script. And maybe if you have made enough short films or something similar style, you wouldn't have to do that. But for me, I just hadn't made anything narratively in so long that I just really needed to show something to people. And also, I knew I could make this, but I knew that to be able to go out and pitch this, I needed to be able to show that I could make this kind of film and that it could be really great. And it was so essential in order to have gotten the film made, I think, to have had this.
And so it was the story of Guillermo, not Ellie, who's actually the protagonist in the film. And where did you film the proof of concept?
So the proof of concept we filmed in like Palmdale, Lancaster area. The feature Borrego is set in the Anza Borrego Desert in Southern California, and so was the short. But to film out there is a lot further, more expensive. So for the proof of concept, we filmed it all in Palmdale, Lancaster, which is closer to LA. It's kind of the closest kind of desert you can get to from about an hour or so drive from LA. And that's where we shot it. I think it was 2 or 3 days shoot. And, I obviously called in lots of favors. But I think it is important with the proof of concept that it still has to look and feel as real as possible. So if you can't wrangle together the resources to make it compelling and professional, I think it's probably not worth doing. It's better to kind of find something that you can do, because for me, I think it's, of course, they don't expect it to look like $1 million movie, of course, but it still has to kind of be able to look and feel kind of what you're going after. And in my case, the film needed to be this very polished, kind of traditionally shot kind of film, slower kind of dolly moves and, things like that. And so we needed to shoot on really nice cameras and put as much resources as we could into it. And so it's always that balance, because of course that costs money and most people don't have that. So you have to either find that money somehow, call in favors. I kind of did all the above. I got a few people to believe in that project who gave me a little more money. And then I called in tons of favors from all the people I'd hired over the years to make commercials and had worked for me, And so together I was able to put together something that looked really nice, looked really high quality, but was made for not very much money. And then I was able to eventually get the film made from that.
And are there rules on the time length of a proof of concept?
No, there's no rules, but I think the general thing with short films is the shorter is the better, because especially, for two things. One is for festivals. It's always easier to get a shorter film program to do a festival, because there's only so much time there is in a festival screening block, right? And if your film is 30 minutes long, that's a really big chunk of time. You could put, a bunch of other shorter films in that same amount of time. And so one is, if you want to get into festivals, I think shorter is always better. And then two, if you're trying to get executives or financiers or anyone like that to watch your movie, if it's shorter, again, they have shorter attention spans. If it's shorter and compelling, I think it's always going to be stronger. So I think mine was 12 or 15 minutes. It's probably the longer end of things where you'd want it to be. But in my case, I was trying to show a couple different styles of scenes and filmmaking, so I needed it to be that length. But in general, if you can keep it short, I think it's always going to be an easier sell for people to watch it.
And how long was the original script?
The feature script, was, I don't know, 100 pages or something, and I think it's turned into a hour and 40-minute movie, I think. Yeah.
Was it originally called Borrego?
Yep, it's always been called Borrego. I hate naming things. Like, I'm actually horrible at picking titles and names for things, so my names are never that original. But, Borrego is the name of the desert that the movie takes place in. And then in Spanish, it also means like lamb or sheep. And that's kind of has a connection also to the character and kind of some of the story. So it made sense. And in the end, it kind of became this word that, not everyone even knows how to say it. And it's kind of confusing, but it's a little mysterious. And I think it kind of works. It works for the film and draws people in, I guess. Who knows? We'll see, I guess.
Oh, I like it. And the Anza Borrego Desert is right where like San Diego and Baja California sort of crossover, or?
Exactly. It's Anza Borrego Desert is kind of where the U.S.-Mexico border meets on one side, surrounded by kind of the mountains next to San Diego on the other side, and then the Salton Sea on the other side. So it's really this kind of no man's land of sorts of California, where it's this huge desert area that has very little population, really almost no towns. It's just this massive desert. Most of it is this state park. But it's a beautiful landscape, stunning deserts, and there really isn't a lot filmed there. My parents had been going there to kind of escape the Seattle winters, and so I would go and visit them, And that's how I kind of get introduced to this landscape. And it just seemed like a really compelling place for a movie to take place.
What's the premise for Borrego?
So the premise for Borrego is it's about a young botanist who moves to this really small town in the middle of the California desert. She's there to study this invasive plant that's growing out in the wild, in the desert. And she's kind of leaving some things in her life behind. And so she decides to go and take this job for several months to be alone out in the desert. And while she's there, she's deep out in the middle of the desert by herself. The sun's going down. She's getting ready to go drive back to town for the night. And all of a sudden, this little tiny airplane, like an ultralight plane, crashes right next to where she is in the desert. And she goes over to see if this person's alive, if she can help. And he is alive, but there's these packages of drugs scattered across the desert floor. And she realizes that he's survived, but he's basically going to shoot her and kill her, take her truck, and go and keep driving these drugs to where he was supposed to be flying this plane. But she convinces him that, he has no idea where he is. It's the middle of the desert. It's the middle of the night. There are no roads. She's only been there a few days, but she tells him that she knows this desert like the back of her hand, and that if he doesn't kill her, she'll help him get to where he's going. And so they eventually basically end up using each other to survive and get out of the desert. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to receive these drugs is like, where are these drugs? And goes in to go find him. And there's a few other characters, the sheriff of the town, his daughter. And even though the film is kind of set in this drug border world kind of story, and that's everything I just explained, but that's really not what the movie's about. The movie is really this movie of survival and choices that people make. And from the beginning, I really didn't want to make a drug movie. That's really not what this is. It's really this kind of more personal movie of the choices you make and how those impact basically the rest of your life or the other people kind of around you. And the movie's kind of this just compelling thriller, basically, in the desert. Lots of action, lots of emotion, and hopefully a fun and entertaining movie.
And you wrote it for a female protagonist?
Yeah, I think so. The original idea for the movie came about because my dad is this amateur botanist, and he was out in the desert in this real area, Borrego Springs, and he had found, with some of the people, he had found this invasive plant that was growing. And this is a very tiny little town. It's not even its official city. It's like unincorporated San Diego County. And so they were going to basically try to get a grant and bring a botanist in to come and study this and help them figure out how to eradicate it. And he told me that, and I was like, this is an amazing setup for why someone would come to a town. And so from there, I started building out this idea of, what would someone be running away from, and why would someone come to this town? And then after that, kind of found an article about a drug plane that had crashed somewhat nearby that desert, and that they were using these ultralights, which are basically like gliders with a little tiny engine, like very janky little planes, because they fly so low and slow, they don't really get picked up by the radar, like a real plane would. But they also crash easily because they're really homemade sometimes and carrying lots of drugs. And so I kind of put those two together. I knew that to make a kind of commercial appealing film that I needed to have some sort of aspect like that into it. But I didn't want to make a border movie or a drug movie. I wanted to make a really personal movie of survival and choices. And so that's kind of just what sets up this whole action and becomes then a more intimate film about this botanist. And yeah, I don't know. From the beginning, she was always a female character. That wasn't like I was like, oh, I gotta make a female character. It was more just, I guess, what made sense, and I think quickly became really compelling. I mean, my mom was a super strong like woman, and so I think I also just grew up like around that, and so I don't know. I think it felt so, I guess, natural to me, which doesn't make sense because I'm a man, but it felt almost more natural to write that than to write it as a guy.
Sure, and the stakes are higher in some sense because she's got to survive, and there's a fear element and things.
For sure. And no, I mean, it becomes a really kind of interesting dynamic, in the desert, and it's, a lot of people would expect it to become like a love story or something like that, and it doesn't have any of that. It's really kind of this story of what are you willing to do, how much are you going to fight for what you want, and and what are those choices you're going to make to kind of go one way or the other.
How many feature scripts had you written prior to Borrego, and how did you know this was the right one to spend time with?
So I think this was the third feature script I had written. The first was the one I made when I was 17 and made this feature film instead of going to college. And then I wrote another one a few years after that with someone else. And it was a cool story, but nothing really came from it. And then I went and stopped basically my own film career and ran this film festival for young directors for 7-8 years. And then I started directing commercials. And so I kind of got out of this path of writing, and you kind of lose. I think when I was doing the festival, especially, I was doing very like producer type things. I was raising money, I was organizing, and I think if you stop kind of being creative and writing and using that muscle, you kind of lose that muscle. And I think that's what had happened. And so I wasn't getting all these ideas anymore of like what I was going to make. And so I think what took it was my dad had told me this real story of this invasive plant that had been growing out in the desert, where he was working as a volunteer botanist, and that triggered something because it was like this connection to him. And I'd spent my childhood actually spending a lot of time in the desert with my parents. We would always go to the desert, and so the desert was this very special place to me. And so I could almost see instantly the whole story kind of put together and visualize it. I knew it was going to be a compelling place. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously it took a lot of time. It wasn't like the first draft was, okay, it's done. It was several years of writing and revisioning and getting feedback from people to make it a really strong film. But I almost think there was something about taking all this time off and having some more life experience, doing some other stuff that then gave me even more kind of power behind it to then be able to go and write something really strong when I had that idea that I was really excited about.
How long did it take you to write the first draft?
It probably took maybe 6 to 7 months maybe for our first draft. I mean, I wasn't writing it every day or anything like that, I mean, it probably took longer than it would if I was going to just sit down and do it now or something, right? But then from there, I probably spent another year to two refining it and doing a few more versions of it. Maybe not quite that long, but at some point in there, I had started to get the idea that I needed to do this proof of concept. And so I think I was working on the proof of concept while always continuing to refine the feature too. And I mean, you're still rewriting and changing things even while you're filming and beyond, and so you're never finished with it. But it definitely, I think, took many rounds of getting feedback and revisions to kind of get it to a place where it was ready to really share and be something you could send out to everyone.
Who taught you how to write a screenplay?
Let's see. I mean, I don't think any one person taught me how to write a screenplay. I definitely have read lots of the screenwriting books, and things that you would be told to read, like Save the Cat or all the other ones, And I think those things are super helpful because knowing that structure is really important. The podcast like script notes, think anything like that. Like I think it's just as much of that information you can take in is super important. But I think in the end of the day, you just have to start writing and then you have to kind of figure it out, And I think, at least for me, because again, that's how I really shine and learn is just by doing it. And so, I had been writing stories ever since I was a little kid. I mean, I made my first movie when I was 8 years old, and so I had always been kind of writing and telling stories. And so I think it is something I've been kind of working on my whole life. And even when I wasn't making a film, I was maybe doing something else, whether it's a commercial or this film festival I ran. I was still in some way kind of telling a story to an audience or kind of creating some sort of experience, right? And so I think it's writing is one of those things you're probably, like filmmaking, some element that's just born in you, right? That has that in you. And then it just takes a lot of time of just doing it and getting practice doing it. I mean, I think the books and other resources can give you a lot of inspiration and also really good at letting you then pick apart your stuff and figure out what's not working in it. But in the end of the day, I think you just have to kind of do it and kind of almost make yourself good by doing it enough.
How do you start writing a screenplay?
Like, I mean, me personally, I start with the big picture concept. What is this about? From there, I would think about, who are the characters, what's going to be compelling and what are the stakes here. And then I think from there, kind of trying to figure out the structure, I mean, obviously there's lots of structure to a feature script. Not that it necessarily has to have that, but that's kind of how you usually write it, is kind of figuring out these acts and different points of the story, right? And I think that was helpful for me with this feature, just because Borrego is, in a sense, a kind of action movie. It is that kind of more of a commercial feel, even though it has a lot more to it than that. But it was still helpful to kind of have those kind of maybe beats and things along the way to kind of work towards. And I think that is super helpful to kind of know, okay, I have this much for that and that much for that. Not to be stuck into that, but it was helpful to kind of give me something to work towards. But I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't think there's one perfect way of writing a script, but I think really it is important to have what is that really compelling idea, and what is the really interesting things about each of these characters that make you want to watch them and create a story and drama from. Because if you don't have that, I think you're really going to struggle when you get to actually physically writing the words of every scene. And so I think now more than ever when I write something, it's kind of really doing as much diving into it before I even start writing to kind of make sure I have that there.
Would you see an Ellie or a Guillermo and kind of study them, a real life, and just even from afar and just envision, yeah, that, and then try to incorporate some of that into the script?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely someone wherever I go, I'm always watching people, and I definitely think I take a lot from real life. I mean, I think that's one of the best things about traveling too, is wherever you are, especially if it's somewhere out of your comfort zone, just seeing some little moment or something can give you so much inspiration. I mean, I'm always writing down ideas and little things I saw, or people I talked to, or a conversation I heard. I think that's definitely a great way to. I think that's probably partly why you become a better writer usually as you get older too, is that you just have more life experience. You've witnessed more characters. You've had more stories, and I think that's something where, as you're a younger filmmaker, you probably have to really pull more from yourself or from your family or things like that, and find those connections, because obviously there's just so many rich characters out there in the real world that you can definitely pull from, for sure. Yeah.
What about the dialogue for these characters? Did it take time to refine it? Because, I mean, they have a very interesting relationship, I'm sure more in the midpoint or...
For sure, yeah. I mean, dialogue is definitely something that's always really hard with a script, right? Is to make that sound really authentic and real. And, for me, when I write, I really kind of perform the script, like I'm really not an actor, but I need to speak out loud when I write the script. And so I'm really almost like acting out the movie as I write it. And so I think, and I actually do a lot of it before I even write it down. I'll kind of be saying it over and over again. So I do spend a lot of time with the dialogue to kind of try to make sure it sounds realistic. And of course, your first draft is probably never going to be great, but as you go on, that's really what changes probably more than anything, is the dialogue. I think the actual structure of the film is really similar to what it was in the first draft, but what's different is, other than some character probably development and expanding, is a lot of the dialogue and just continually working that to make that sound real. And then that really also continues when you go to make the movie. I mean, obviously some directors and writers are very strict about their scripts, but I was never like that, where if the actor has another idea for a way to say this, that's great. And especially in my case, the film has several scenes in Spanish, which I'm not fluent in Spanish at all. And so in those scenes especially, it was very important for those actors to kind of take ownership of that and be able to say this in a way that was casual or slang or however they would say that. But even in the English scenes, I try to have each of the actors be able to take something from their own life and bring it to that character. And so we did a lot of, adjusting even before we shot the film, of what if is this not something you would do, or how could we make this more relatable to you? And here's some words we could change here and there. And you're even doing that on the fly while making the movie, like doing a take and that didn't sound right. Like, what else could we try? And so I think to get really believable, strong dialogue, it's just always about experimenting and kind of tinkering with it, I guess. That's really at least how I approach it.
What makes your writing process different from everyone else?
I mean, I can't speak for too many other people because I don't know that many other people's writing processes. But I mean, mine has been evolving, I guess. I mean, I haven't written that many things, right? And so it's kind of constantly learning, I guess, what works. I think the thing I just recently have been writing is this limited series that I've been developing. And I think for me, it was trying to take as much lessons as I learned from the last script, which is just that the characters really have to have, every single character has to have something really compelling that they're fighting for or want, They can't just be existing. They really, even if we don't know or in the story, hear every detail of it, I have to kind of know that exists and have it in my head. So I most recently kind of wrote a whole page or two on every character, and what was their backstory and what was their life like and all these things that are maybe they won't even make it into the script. But I think I'm just doing as much kind of pre-thinking and planning as I can now, where I'll just be kind of meditating on it for a long time, and I'll get an idea and I'll take a voice note or something and I'll record that. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it before I even started writing it. And at least for me, that's, I think, what turned into one is it was a lot easier to actually write it when I did write it. And then two, I think it's the strongest writing I've ever had. And so I think the more time you can kind of just let it all sink in, I think does allow it to kind of marinate and kind of be even stronger.
In the script for Borrego, that's like a 3-year marination?
Well, for Borrego, I think it was slightly different. I probably more in that sense dove in quicker with the first draft and then spent a lot more time adjusting and changing and refining. Whereas the thing I've even more recently written that hasn't been made yet, I probably spent more time marinating, but then less time actually writing to get to something really strong, So I don't know if there's one perfect way or anything, but at least for me, I think that's what I found and makes something really compelling is if I spend a little bit more time just kind of letting it all sink in before diving in to write it.
What was it about Borrego that just you couldn't stop writing?
I think there was just this personal connection for me with the film, both with this idea that started with my dad based on kind of him as this amateur botanist. But then too, just the desert itself was a character of this movie, really was like the fifth or sixth character of the movie was this landscape and was this desert. And I think just having grown up, I spent so much of my childhood camping and going on these desert adventures with my parents. That was just where they went. We didn't go to really Disneyland or other places. We did once, but mostly we went to the desert and I wandered around the desert and thought of ideas and was, just in that kind of world. And so I think, I just knew this was such a compelling setting and so few things had kind of been set specifically in this desert. Almost nothing had been shot there. And I just loved that kind of movie. This is almost like a neo-Western of sorts. It doesn't really feel so much like a Western, but it kind of has a lot of that vibes. And I do like that kind of film. And so I just knew this was going to be a good film. I knew it was really important to make a film I wanted to make a film that people wanted to see. I didn't want to just make a film that was too intimate and it would never get seen. I wanted to kind of make this blending of worlds where it had this kind of commercial appeal with some action and excitement and thrills, but also wasn't just that fluff either. It had dynamic characters that were interesting and authentic and was something that kind of this blending of films that maybe doesn't exist as much. And I just knew that if I could pull that off, I could make something really, really interesting that people would want to see.
Do you believe that there are writing dead ends, or that a writer can always find a creative solution out of sort of what seems like they can't go any further?
I think definitely you could reach a dead end if you didn't probably do enough thinking ahead of time and kind of figuring out if this idea was going to work, perhaps. I've never not finished a screenplay or something, but I know a lot of people do struggle with that where they get to a point they can't keep writing. But I think that's probably just because you probably started writing too soon before you really figured out what is this character's, I don't want to say motivation, but kind of, all those kind of typical things, like what, those are real, like what is it this movie's really about and what is it this person's fighting for, whatever kind of genre the film is. Of course, you can reach those kind of temporary dead ends probably all the time, struggling with writer's block and all that kind of stuff. But I think in terms of ones that you can't get out of, it's probably started because there's something missing in your kind of development of the overall concept.
Did you have any troubles with Borrego, let's say the second act or the ending, anything where it was just a little bit more time spent on it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the second act is always the hardest just because the first act is just setting up. You're kind of, even if you don't have the idea figured out, you can kind of set that story up and get it going right. And the ending, you hopefully know the ending or where it's going. And the stuff in the middle is usually what's the hardest because it's longer usually, and it's what has to kind of keep the momentum going. And so I think that's probably where I had the most challenge of kind of figuring that out. I think also some challenges I had is as I got into trying to actually finance this film, I did have to start cutting back certain things in order to make the budget work. So I had to start cutting some scenes and trimming some areas. And so then it kind of came more like a bit of a puzzle of like, okay, what could I take away that won't hurt the film, but will make us a cheaper film to be able to make? And so I think it's always this kind of constant kind of journey with the script, especially if you're making the script to direct. It never is this perfect linear process, I think.
What makes us care about the characters in Borrego?
So I think in Borrego, we care about the characters because they all have something that they're kind of fighting for or dreaming towards, you know? So even we'll say bad guys in the Borrego, they're not really evil people, you know? They've gotten into a situation that they didn't necessarily want to be in, but it's where they are, you know? So in one case, you know, they needed to support their family, and so they took a job doing something they knew that was wrong or illegal, but it was their only choice, you know, or someone is running away from something in their past and they're trying to put it behind them, but they know it's going to catch up with them, but they're just ignoring that. And I think there's something that we can all relate to in all these characters. Most of us aren't drug dealers and crossing the border and all that, but you can still find the humanity in these characters, and that was something that was super important to me because, you know, I really wanted to be super sensitive to making a film about these kind of people and this border story because I'm not from that world. I don't live that. I have lots of friends who have family members who are from that and could talk to them about that, but I really wanted to try to tell this in as, I guess, gentle and authentic as a way possible, where it wasn't really about that. The film sets that up, and that's what sets up the story. But ultimately, it's about just these individual people and what their choices are and what their beliefs are and what they're fighting for in their own life. And that's really what the film is about. And so I think that's what makes it unique and compelling for people to watch.
How confident were you that you could pitch this movie and sell it to investors?
So I think having this proof of concept that I made was super helpful to both give me the confidence because I knew I'd made something really great with that. But then I just knew it was also going to make it so much easier to sell the movie to people. But I knew no one. You know, I have no friends or family connection to the industry. I have no agent or manager. I still don't even, as of right now. Like, it's such an outside world, Hollywood, the true system, right? It's not very welcoming to outsiders, you know? I mean, it's very tough to kind of break those walls. And so it just took a lot of time and being super persistent. I mean, I just never gave up. And that's really how this movie got made. Because there's plenty of times where I thought, man, this is never going to happen and I should give up. But I didn't. I just kept going. And that's really how this movie got made. Almost no other. Of course, their script was good. The proof of concept was good. I got lots of luck along the way. But more than anything, it was just this persistence of not giving up and continuing to fight for it. And just telling myself, I was going to make this movie. Doesn't matter if I was like 100 years old by the time it got made. Like, I was going to make this movie one way or the other at some point. And I think that's just how it got made.
So no agent or manager, and the film opens in 10-ish days in theaters and on demand, right?
Yeah. You basically rent it wherever you can rent things, and then it'll be in, I think, 10 different cities the first weekend, playing.
Wow,
Yeah.
Okay. So when you hear people say, well, I don't have an agent or manager, was that you at one time saying that? Or was that never, again, resourcefulness, you don't worry about that?
I think after having a little bit of a window into it when I made this first feature when I was in high school, basically, and then spending a decade or so kind of adjacent to the industry, but not really in it by doing a film festival and then directing commercials, I think I realized enough that it's very difficult to do anything, but that this industry, it doesn't really want to go and find people. It really wants to wait until you already have something for them and they'll maybe find you. And so I kind of knew, I never even tried to get an agent or manager because I just knew it was probably a waste because, I don't know, I guess I didn't think until I had something that I could really show as a success that I would be able to be of use, I guess, to them in that way. And so maybe that's just my own, I guess, thinking or being too critical, but I just think there's no guarantee just because I know plenty of people who've gotten agents or managers and then nothing happens, And so I think more than anything, it's just about what are you going to create yourself? And I think that's the key to everything. Of course, that can open a lot more doors. And that would have probably sped up the process if I had that, for sure, because it took still probably 4 years from the time of starting to write it to getting to finance it, which that's still a long time. I'd like to get that a lot shorter, hopefully, for the next one. But yeah, I think above all, you just need to kind of go at it and figure out a way, and you'll eventually, if your script and your thing is good enough, I think people will eventually take note, and it'll get made. It just might take quite a long time.
Can you take us through the process of how you got the money for Borrego, or like step by step?
Sure. So I think with anything with features, the financing is so much based on the cast and this kind of perceived value that the cast has. So for better or worse, that's how a lot of movies get made. I would say that there's even movies that get made where the financing folks or the distributor maybe doesn't even read the script all the way. They look at what is this film and who's in it. That's not all the cases, but in so many ways, that's how films get made. And so that was really clear that we needed some sort of talent to kind of finance this movie. And my film consists of a female lead who was written as Caucasian. Then the rest of the cast is all Latino. And the kind of sad reality of Hollywood is that neither of those people have as much value as maybe like a white man actor. And especially the Latinos was hard because there's a couple names who we all know who are really famous, right? But unless that's one of those names, everyone else in Hollywood's eye has basically no foreign value or no kind of, value in the sense of what they think is value, right? And then there's also not as many probably female actresses who also have the same value as a male actor. And so it was a tougher position to be in. I even had a few producers tell me like, hey, you should change one of the characters to like the sheriff in my movie, who is also Latino, even though he's not a drug dealer or anything like that. But it was authentic to this world and to this town we were in, right? I didn't want all the bad guys just to be Mexican or whatever. And so, but multiple times someone said, well, change that guy into a white guy and we can get someone who's more famous to play that part, and that will help you finance the movie. Or even the lead character, maybe if that was a man. I mean, it sounds cliche and kind of crazy, but that was still what people were saying, and it's, it took a lot of pushing back too, because I really wanted to make this film authentically with, especially the Latino actors. I wanted them to be totally authentic. And so, these were, I spent a year plus looking for actors from Central America and Mexico where they were just amazing actors, but maybe were kind of undiscovered in a lot of ways. So like one of our actors, this was his first American film he'd ever been in, but his value was basically zero, we'll say, in terms of dollar. And so what that meant is we had to put all of the value into our leading actress, and that eventually ended up being Lucy Hale, who got that part. And so it was basically her value financing the film. And she, for her, this was also a really kind of big stepping stone film in terms of performance in her kind of career too, because she had never done a film like this. She came from a very famous TV show that she was on for a decade or so that became very famous. And she's done other features, but she's never done something quite this serious and this kind of meaty, and she was really excited about it. But she does have a lot of value because she has a huge fan base, and her films that she has been in have done pretty well. And so we were basically had to use her value, because I, as a director, had no value because this was really my first real film. And so that's how they looked at it. By they, I mean Hollywood and the financiers, how they looked at how this film should get made. And so that basically gave us a number that we could then kind of create to what is the budget of this movie. It was almost working backwards. Like, this is how much we'll pay you, and this is what the movie can be made for, kind of, And it's a very maybe outdated system. I think there's a lot of problems with it. I mean, it means a lot of really good films probably don't get made, and a lot of films with the same silly actors we've seen a million times over are always in the same movies because they get made. Or you see these really kind of crappy action films with one famous person and get made, because of that. So it's not a great model, but unfortunately, at least as of the time I made this movie, that's the model I had to fit into to get this movie made. And so that's how I did it. We had to kind of work in that system. But I was lucky to be able to, by getting this one actress who had enough value, she then allowed me to then cast the rest of the movie with people who were not as famous and were more just really talented, compelling actors who were authentic and could bring so much to the movie. So in the end, it all worked out, but it was really hard, and just very thankful that Lucy got excited about it and wanted to join it, because she's really what, from that point on, is really what compelled to get this movie financed.
Right. And sorry, this came from a casting director that you were able to get her the script?
Yeah. So, I was sending my proof of concept short film and my feature around to various people. One person who I'd met probably 10 years ago, who was an assistant at the time, was now like an executive. And she was working in TV, but she knew some people in film. And so she sent it to this producer. He liked both the script and the short I had done. And so he wanted to try to help me get it made. So he had a casting director that he was working with often, where she, I had no money to start paying anyone. So she agreed to kind of help us out as a favor and just send the script to a few of the agencies, and get their feedback and see, if there were some names that they had that they thought might be interested in this kind of project. And so that's how we kind of started the process. So we got different names of some actors, and from there, Lucy's name was in that list. And, at first, I knew her name, I knew who she was, but I was not, it wasn't like, oh my God, that's her, she's Ellie, because, she had been in Pretty Little Liars and other shows where it was very much kind of teen drama kind of type stuff. And that's not what Borrego is. But I watched some of her work and I realized that she's this incredible actress that just hadn't been really given these high quality scripts and projects to sink her teeth into, because she is a really amazing actress. And I knew that this would almost be as good as working with a undiscovered person, because no one would have seen her do this kind of role. So it instantly became super exciting for me to have her, because I knew she would have the kind of the famous clout or whatever to get the movie made and market it, but she would almost be like introducing someone to the world again, because she had never done something like this. And that's what it was. She's incredible in this, and I'm so excited for people to see it, because she is amazing in it. So yeah, that's really kind of how it worked for me.
And the sheriff, the decision to have him as a single dad, I thought that was interesting. We don't really hear too much about single dads. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't know where that personally came from. That wasn't my experience, but I guess I liked this idea of the dad and daughter relationship. I wanted all the characters to have something they were struggling with, and so he's this deputy sheriff in a very small little town where there's not very much action. He hands out speeding tickets. That's kind of his job, right? And we don't really talk about it in the film, but the idea is that he's probably also kind of run away from something, or has come here to have kind of a safe place for him and his daughter. And he's not looking for any trouble and doesn't see much action. And so he's kind of thrust into this action and is totally out of his comfort zone. And his daughter then ends up getting caught up in it too. And so his worst fears have all come, together with that. And so I think I just like the idea that he had so much on the line with just being fully responsible. His whole life was really being taken care of her. And that was what he was fighting for in it. So that's kind of where his kind of backstory came from, yeah.
If we took your pitch, how much was about the idea of the film and how much was about the return on investment?
I think it's probably a 50-50 kind of pitch in terms of the creative side and the financial side. Obviously it depends on who you're pitching. When it's an actor or something like that, it's all about the character and all about the story. When it's an investor, it's much more on the financial side. But hopefully the people you're working with do care about making a good movie, and that was the case in my case. But ultimately, making movies is a business, and unless you can finance it yourself, you have to kind of work within that system. And I felt confident, though, that this film could be financially successful, because it wasn't some sort of quiet indie drama. It was a really compelling kind of commercial film, but with a lot more to it, So if you look at the trailers that the distributor has made, it's a very commercial version of the movie. It's almost it's a lot more depth than in the film when you actually watch it. But they are able to market it like a broader kind of commercial action movie, and that's going to bring people in. And when they watch it, they're going to hopefully be pleasantly surprised that there's actually so much more to it. That it's not so much that it really is a much deeper, complex film. And so, but I knew that that's how you could do it, and that would be a model that would work. And so The movie is not a very expensive movie, and we made it for as little budget as possible, and we put a lot into it, and we were able to make a really great looking film on a pretty small indie budget still. And so I think it's in a place now where, because of all that, I think it will hopefully make its money back and be successful. And I think it's an interesting size film that I think we could be doing more of, these kind of couple $1 million films where it has this blending of genres and worlds where there is some risk still, because you're trying to tell maybe a more deeper story, but it's not just I think Hollywood needs to take a little bit more risks, but there could also be some calculated risks like this, which is not everything has to be some sort of sequel or remake or whatever. Like there are sizes of films that still make sense where it still could make its money back. It still has a good shot at being a very successful film, but it's still telling a new, fresh, original story with a unique cast, and a maybe really almost first-time director. So I hope I hope if it's successful, it'll prove and show that they can be taking more chances on people like me.
How much do investors care about movie ideas?
Movie ideas. I mean, I think if it's a good investor, they care about the idea and the concept. Certain investors don't care at all, and they just want to see who's in it and what the genre is, and what the dollars and all that stuff is. What is the tax incentive and all that kind of things. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of movies get made. But that's also why we end up with a lot of not so good movies too. So I think the best case is when you kind of think of it from both sides. You obviously need to understand this is a business. It has to make money and have a shot at that, but you still have to make a compelling, good movie. Otherwise, what's the point? Because we're only doing this to entertain people and make good stories. So I was lucky to have investors that wanted to make a good film. And so hopefully, that's where people want to kind of go towards when you're trying to make your film. I definitely met with people who didn't have that vision, and I didn't make the movie with them, So I think it is about trying to be patient and I probably could have made the movie a little bit sooner if I had made more compromises creatively. But I was pretty clear on certain things, specifically authentic cast and making the film in a certain style and in actual real locations, that fit the story, and not shooting in New Mexico or something that just fit totally out of place, just because it had a good incentive or something. And so it definitely probably took a little bit longer, but in the end, it made a really great film by kind of holding out a little bit longer, probably.
So from your experience in 2003, when you were a teenager and you made a feature, do you think the concept, the idea was important at that time to those distributors versus now it's just much different, it's a machine?
So I think that first feature I made when I was in high school, it got picked up from a distributor because I think they could tell a bigger story by this 17-year-old had made a feature film. Like that's kind of was the selling. I was the star of that movie, I guess, So I don't think it's changed a whole lot. Obviously, there's more and more opportunities now for distribution than ever, and so I still think there's lots of opportunities, and there's lots of smart, good distributors that want to make good things. But unfortunately, there still are a lot of movies that are made more from the financial only sense and not just, is this a really good movie that's gonna people are gonna enjoy? Because I think also people sometimes when they analyze a movie only from the money side, they forget that the creative is a money side too. Like if the movie's crap, then it doesn't mean the movie's gonna be successful just because it fits everything else. And if you make a really good film, it can still be successful. So I think it still should be all around the story and the script. Unfortunately, it isn't, but hopefully, if more films are successful of this kind of size that are like that hopefully that can change some things.
Okay, so you have a name attached, you have someone who has a fan base. Then how does the money then follow?
Yeah, so I had written the script, I had made this proof of concept, I had gotten Lucy Hale attached to star in it, and then it still took 2 years to go make the movie after that. So yeah, because we still had to find the money. Basically, we had her value now, which gave the movie an actual way to kind of have value for people to see that it could make money once it got made. but we still had to get people to commit to a certain dollar amount. We had to then just find the actual people that wanted to invest in that. Our model was after, so Lucy, she signed on. She actually kind of came on also as an executive producer to kind of say, hey, I'll help you try to go get this made too a little bit. And so she sent the script to a producer. He came on board to help me. He was excited about it. He took it to some more producers. That's kind of how it always works, right? It just kind of goes on to the next person. They eventually were able to get us, it's called an MG, or minimum guarantee. And it's basically a distributor pre-buying the movie before you've even made it, just off the script and the cast. So they basically looked at it and said, okay, Lucy Hale, this script, we think it's this much money we can make off of it, so this is what we'll offer it to you. And so even then, they don't give you the money to go make it. You then have to still find someone else to usually finance that contract, basically. It's almost like collateral you use to kind of then go make it. So that's how we did it. That was our model. And so, that's how we were able to get the movie made. And yeah, I mean, it still took a long time. And, this was also like right, we were supposed to go make the movie or hoping to go make the movie, and then COVID happened. So that pushed us off again and had another delay. And so, it's just never, and even when you think it's all put together, something falls apart, and so it's a whole process. I was a producer on the movie, but my three other producers were really the key people in terms of the financial side. So they were really the ones getting that money and putting that together and managing all that. So, I can't speak to all of it in super detail, but it's definitely a complicated process that is, you never know what's going to happen next, basically, with it.
So the fact, too, that Lucy Hale was an executive producer and was sort of helping to shepherd the movie probably was incredibly helpful as well.
For sure. I mean, having her name attached as an actress is huge, but then having her as vouching for it as a really strong project that she wants to put her weight behind was super essential. I mean, just legitimize the project and open more doors. I mean, it's funny though, even when you have someone famous attached, it can still be really hard. It's just so hard to get a movie made, no matter who it is trying to make it. I think they make it as difficult as possible, and but I think if you just keep going and never give up, it will usually find a way.
Were there any things where, let's say, you were all boarding a plane ready to film and something fell through?
Luckily, we didn't have anything fall through too late in the game. I think the biggest thing was just we shot the film in Spain. We ended up doing that because we had to basically, the time window we were going to originally make this was in the spring of 2020, which of course was when COVID was coming and shutting the world down. So then we had this window in the fall when we thought we could go make it somewhere because the world was starting to open up again, at least in Europe. But after we waited too long, Lucy and other people might not be available anymore. So we knew if we were going to make it this year, as in 2020, when we made it, we had to go then. And the only place we could really do that was not in California where we were set, because everything was still so much more closed down. To get the permits at the state park and everything were already going to be complicated. But even during COVID, it was just almost impossible. And so I had been looking at other countries and places to film the movie before this, even just to kind of to explore what opportunities there were. And Spain has this desert that looks almost identical to California desert, to the desert of Anza-Borrego where the movie is set. And that was not my first choice originally, and it's not what I ever thought was the right move, to go all the way to Spain just to make the movie that's set here. But it ended up being probably the perfect thing, because the desert, it was such a perfect match. And then it allowed us, our money actually went a lot further in Spain, because one is there's a tax incentive for the whole country for filming. But then just the crew and other things, the money, I think it allowed us to get probably even more for our money. I mean, you obviously lose money too on exchanging to euros and flying people over there and all that stuff. But in the end of the day, we found a great group of people that wanted to help us make this movie, and we made a really great film there. And so it all worked out. But I think, yeah, to your question, it was the hardest thing was probably just getting the visas for people to get over there, allowing, even the airlines didn't want us to get on the plane, because at the time no one was traveling even, Americans weren't allowed to travel. And so, the first plane I tried to get on leaving LAX, they wouldn't even let us on the plane because they were worried we wouldn't be allowed into the country, because it was just such a rare thing for people to be leaving the country. So there was those kind of complications, but once we were there, it was just the typical normal complications of just trying to figure it out. But Luckily, there weren't any sort of major drama or anything like that.
So you had your boarding pass and maybe a carry-on, and they said, "Sorry, sir, we can't have you."
Yeah, no, we were trying to check in for the plane to go to Spain to go film a movie, and we had a ticket and everything, but the actual agents checking our bags in basically said like you're not you don't have, you're missing some piece of paperwork or whatever. We had it, but they were just had never experienced this yet, that an American was leaving the country to go make a movie somewhere, that would be allowed by the Spanish government, and so it was just so new to everyone, knowing this was August, September of 2020. It was just still so fresh, still in the middle of the pandemic, really.
How do you get a great performance out of an actor that you've never worked with before?
So I think in order to get good performances out of any actor, it's about talking to them a lot ahead of time, really kind of diving deep into the character and the material. In the case of Borrego, I met with all the actors beforehand. I mean, of course, even before we went to go film, but even right before we started filming, when we were all together in the same town, we had deep conversations about their character, who they were, other things that weren't even on the page. I told them more things that I thought. I asked them what they were thinking about. In the case of all the actors, they brought a lot of their own kind of backstory to the script. We even did some adjustments and changes to kind of customize the character to their things from their own life, especially the actors from Mexico and Central America, where they had a lot of real experience with friends or family that were maybe in that world with cartel or drug adjacent, and they could kind of pull some things from their own life that would make it really authentic and real to them. And so that's really the main thing. I mean, I think also just, I've obviously have a lot of experience now doing so many commercials, and I have worked with a lot of actors, so I know kind of the basics of, you just gotta talk to them and understand who is the actor you're dealing with, because they all kind of work different ways. Some of them you can be really direct and open with. Some of them you have to be more sensitive and gentle with. And so I think I've learned that and know that really well. And I try to build as close of personal relationships to them as possible also, because I just think when they trust you, it's gonna be so much easier. In this case, making the movie, we were all in this kind of COVID bubble, living in this small little town together in Spain. And so that was helpful, because when we weren't filming, we were all just hanging out with each other because that's all we could do. And so we all became very close. And so I think that did also help, because we could all just be very open and honest with each other. And I think they also knew that I had such a strong vision for this. So it's about getting their confidence, I think, from the very beginning, would even get them to sign on too, to see that, I knew exactly what I wanted with this film, and I knew how to get it. And so I think they really trusted me, and that allowed us to kind of go to a lot of really good places with the performances and with the characters.
Do you think you'll use that in the future in terms of letting the actor bring parts of their own lives into the characters, rather than being very dogmatic or very, dictator sort of, in a way to just know the exact what's on the page?
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think because I'm more of a director than a writer, I've never been like, oh, this is some perfect dialogue, you have to keep that. I mean, that's just never been my thing. I've always think that this is a collaborative form. Like, actors, everyone has their own experience, and if they can bring their own thing to it, that's only going to help the script, as long as we're kind of staying in the same world, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think, there's plenty of people who've done projects, I guess, where they've developed them with the actors even to begin with, right? I think that's super compelling. I mean, I think the more you can pull from reality and in whatever world that is, you're going to have a more compelling and authentic script and movie. So definitely something I think I'll continue.
Were any of the actors new to being in front of the camera? I know you said some were new for American film.
Yeah, I mean, one of them is his first American film. The other, the kind of teenage girl in the movie, I think it was her first feature. So they had done lots of other projects. I mean, everyone was really a pretty experienced actor and was very comfortable and confident. So I think it was really just more about getting them confident with these characters and with our kind of process of making this movie, because this was a very kind of rugged indie way of making the movie. We had to shoot very quickly, and You know, it wasn't this luxurious experience, you know. So I think just making sure everyone kind of understood that going into that. But I think overall they were really excited about that because it was going to be something there was this kind of indie kind of, I want to say film school kind of vibe with it, because the movie was obviously a legit movie, but we still were all kind of making this as if it was this really special kind of personal project, you know, because it was also the first movie that everyone had done since COVID. Everyone had been in lockdown for 6 months, and the crew too. They were just so excited to be there, and were just really passionate. So everyone worked really hard to try to make the best thing possible, and yeah, I think it worked out.
What do you do when an actor doesn't give you the exact performance you're looking for?
Well, I think that's just part of the process. You know, I think it's trying something again. I mean, obviously, that's why casting great actors to begin with is so important, because hopefully you have to do very little yourself. It's really just guiding them a little bit and letting them run with it, because a strong actor should be able to kind of take that on. But of course, everyone can get stuck on things, and I think it's just about having a conversation. I mean, after a lot of takes, I go up to the actor and talk to them. I'm always very intimate too. I don't yell something like, "Hey, here's your note," because people then get very self-conscious, and that's never a good idea. So I think just about talking about it, be like, "Hey, that was interesting, but like, I don't know, what if we try this?" Or I don't know if that's landing. I think it's just about being as honest as you can with people, sometimes in a gentle way if you know they might be sensitive to it. But I think you can always work through it. I mean, the biggest challenge in a movie like this is just the time constraint. So we're all under such huge pressure. You know, we had sometimes maybe only an hour or so to even film an entire scene with multiple coverage angles and everything like that. So that was the biggest pressure for everyone, was just, we have to go really quick and it's got to be good. So that doesn't help anything, but sometimes that can add to the excitement, and can even add to the performance too, in a good way. But in general, the actors in this were just incredible, and so the performances we got were really out of the park in a lot of ways. And there was never a situation of like, oh, that's awful or anything. If anything, maybe the only case is at times, you know, Leonard Gomez, who's one of our actors, it was his first American film. You know, English is really a second language to him, and so sometimes he and I had struggle communicating, even especially in the really kind of minute kind of nuance, I guess, too, because we could each talk in the other person's language in a small way, but to tell them a really detailed note sometimes got lost in translation. And so that was probably the biggest challenge at times, was just kind of getting those really specific things through him. But I think that's also what allowed him on screen to feel so real and raw, because he and Lucy's character don't really able to communicate very well. And in real life, they could sometimes struggle too. And you could feel that on screen. And so I think it actually added so much to the movie. You could kind of feel that uncomfortableness in it. Yeah.
What did you learn from working with the actors on Borrego that will be useful going forward with other projects?
I just think casting really terrific actors is just essential. You know, I did meet with a couple people for a few of the parts who I was considering, and ended up not going with one of them in a case because I could tell I wasn't going to be able to get along with this person, or this person was going to be difficult. And I don't think that's very many people, but I think there are some people like that, even some probably famous, really good actors. And so I just think it's really, especially on a movie like this that's limited budget, was going to be hard. I knew I had to have every actor 100% on board with doing it in the way we were going to do it, and be able to bring so much to the table. And that's what all these actors in Borrego did. They all did so much research, spent so much time trying to make the best performances they could. And so I think it would all come back to always finding those actors who are going to do so much for the part. So even if that means a totally unknown, undiscovered person, but someone who just really wants to put in the work and believes in this project, it's just so important, I think. And that really does translate too on the screen to the performances, I think.
Did you have any worries before you went to set, or even before you flew to Spain? Or is worry something that you're not consumed by worry, you're more like it's a puzzle that you want to figure out?
I mean, I'm always worrying. That's probably my constant state, is worry, but it's a different kind of worry. It's not I can't do this worry. It's more of a, how is this going to go, or what do I need to do next kind of worry. You know, it's more of breaking it down kind of worry. You know, I think I had complete confidence that I could make this movie. I think just because I've been making movies since I was 8 years old, I've basically been preparing for this for my entire life to make a movie like this. So I was totally confident in being able to direct this movie, in the vision and the style, the cinematography, all that stuff, working with the actors. I think just my biggest worry was just, could we pull this off in the amount of time we had? Would everything go right? I mean, I was looking at the weather every day, all day long. You know, is the clouds going to come out? Is that storm going to pass that says it's going to pass? Because we were so reliant on the weather, being totally exposed out in the desert. So that was my number one worry, was would the rains come, basically. You know, that was my main worry. But otherwise, I think it was just, whether it was me being naive or not, I knew I could do this movie. I knew I could pull it off. And I'd been really preparing for years to make it, because I had written the script so long ago and was putting all this work into like planning out every single shot and all the things so much in advance, that I was really confident when it came to actually go and make the movie.
And also too, with the festival, you know, I'm not saying that just that festival, but any special event is like herding cats at some point. You know, if something goes wrong here or whatever, and it can all just, you know, spiral down. So
for sure, no, I mean, all my experience in my life of all the different things I've done, it all contributes to, you know, being able to handle that. I mean, so much of filmmaking, especially at this kind of indie scale, is being able to handle problems and turn on a dime and figure something else out. Because there was plenty of times every day of filming where, you know, maybe we would have, I mean, I planned every single shot out months in advance, how we were going to make this movie. But then the week before, we would say, okay, we're only going to have 2 hours to film, so then I'd have to change the shots again. And then the day before, we'd be like, actually, we're only going to have an hour and a half. So I'd change the plan again. And then on the day of, we'd maybe only have 45 minutes left now to go shoot that whole scene. So then instead of doing 6 different shots, 7 different shots, maybe I'd only have to do it in 2 shots or 1 shot. And so it was constantly having to kind of think on your feet and change and come up with a new plan that doesn't hopefully destroy the creative aspect and storytelling and filmmaking of that scene, but maybe you could actually add to it in a fresh way. But you never know. You kind of have to just kind of go with it and try it out. But there's not very much time for thinking when you're actually on the set. You have to kind of just go and do it and make a decision. And it can be very exciting. It's obviously a little scary, but in this case, it all kind of worked out, because I think you have that planning, you have that, you know what you want in your head, so you're able to then very quickly, if you've done all that work ahead of time, you're able to then think on the fly and come up with a new plan that you know will still work, because you already know so clearly what it is you need to do with that scene or with that shot or whatever it is.
does anything scare you?
Anything? Well, for
Film
sure.
related.
Well, everything in life, probably. Definitely scared of dying. I mean, no.
Sure, okay, let's cross those off the list.
but-
Let's just talk film related, yeah.
I mean, I'm scared of, you know, what's the next thing I'm going to do? You know, when am I going to be able to do the next project? I mean, I think that's the biggest fear, is just, how do you make this into a sustainable career? Hopefully, in a few weeks, when this film comes out, it'll do well, and that'll build onto more things. But you just never know. You know, I think that's just the biggest fear, is how do you make this into something where it doesn't become a struggle, but it becomes something you can kind of really do full time, only making kind of narrative kind of films. So, I mean, that's probably my biggest fear, is just how to kind of keep doing more of it.
When you're out in nature trying to make a movie like this, how do you make the quote-unquote set comfortable for the actors?
I don't think the set ever gets comfortable for anyone, because it really is just, you're out in the desert making a movie. And that's what makes it so compelling and real when you watch it, because it's very real. I mean, we were surviving in the desert basically along with the characters in the movie. You know, we had some small amount of vehicles, tiny little cast vans almost as their trailer. We had some pop-up tents and things like that. But in general, we were out in the middle of the desert in the elements, you know, making this happen. I mean, we started filming in late summer, and we ended filming. We started scouting probably in late summer. Ended filming in early November. And so we experienced all of the elements. We started in the extreme heat and then ended in the very cold nights of the desert. Honestly, every weekend while we were filming, we filmed for 5 weeks, and every weekend I would go to this outdoor store in Spain where we were filming and buy a bigger jacket, because it was getting colder and colder every week. And you know, it was, I mean, on the very last day of filming, there was a huge storm came out of nowhere in the middle of the desert, and we had to abandon everything all the trucks, the camera. We had to leave it all and escape basically because we were worried we would all get stuck out there. And that was the very last shot we were setting up for, the very last day of filming, and that happened. And so what we ended up doing actually is the very last shot we shot underneath a gas station on the side of a highway, just outside of the desert. And we basically, we just needed a close-up of something. Luckily it was all we were missing, but we didn't have any lights. We didn't have any of our grip stuff. We sent someone in like a 4-wheel drive back to get the camera out of the camera truck, which we needed that. We got that, but we didn't have a generator or anything else. So we ended up basically using flashlights and people's jackets to make like, lighting equipment, and shot this very last shot of the movie during the pouring rain in a storm underneath this gas station, awning basically on the side of a highway. And so it was complete like indie film school, basically home movie style making to get the very last shot of the movie we needed before we could finish the movie. So it was pretty crazy way to end the movie. But in general, we got very lucky with the weather, because a movie like this, it's all about the weather. I mean, there was no lighting during the daytimes of this movie. It was all relying on the sun, very little bounce and reflection either. It was always just kind of filming with the natural light of the desert. Only at nights did we use lights, to create kind of a moonlight effect. But it's very hard. I would not want to go make another in the wild desert movie right now, because it's exhausting and incredibly difficult, especially at this kind of budget scale. It was a lot of just running around the desert and getting really dusty and dirty and kind of making it happen. And it was fun. I mean, people enjoyed that, but after 5 weeks, I think you're ready to have a break and go back to maybe a calmer, easier world.
And also, too, how are you protecting the camera from dust getting in?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that was always a can of spray from the ACs, cleaning the lens. And yeah, I mean, everything was covered in dust. At the end of the day, they would have like a kind of a generator powered air blower, and everyone was just dusting off their sound gear and the camera equipment and everything like that, because everything would just get covered in dust, and you would be covered in dust. I mean, I basically had clothes you would just like leave at the front of your hotel room because it was just so dirty and dusty and everything. So you just come back and take a shower right away. I mean, it was definitely, and part of that was what I think brought so much to the actors, because they were out there real. I mean, they were getting dirty. They were getting, hurt sometimes. I mean, they were running around. Lucy was running up and down the canyons of these desert areas we were filming in. I mean, it was almost like we were really in this movie, while making it. So that, I think, did add to the element, though, for the actors to kind of really feel natural with it, because they weren't just hanging out in a trailer, having smoothies or something like that. They were basically standing out in the sun with us, or trying to keep warm at night. And it was, I mean, I think Lucy said it's the hardest thing she's ever filmed, and I think most of the actors probably agree that it was a very difficult movie, but you can kind of feel that all in the movie when you watch it too.
Any wild animals?
Spain doesn't have a lot of wild animals in their desert, so very few things we saw, tiny little creatures, but there luckily aren't snakes and some of the other animals that there are in the California desert. So that was the one advantage to filming in Spain, is you got to avoid that at least.
Should cinema be an escape?
Hopefully it can be both, because there's certain times when you just want to watch something to zone out and forget everything and have that escape. But I also think films have this incredible power to transform lives and change the world in so many ways. And so if films were all just kind of fluff and escapism, I don't think films would be doing that change. So I think it's always going to be important to have films that have a deeper meaning or an important message, whether that's a documentary or a narrative. So I think the best case scenario is that the world, Hollywood, keeps producing all kinds of movies, because, we all need to see everything, depending on what our mood is. My personal worry is that some people will start to only want to watch that escapism. They'll only want to watch the stuff that'll feel safe and make them feel good, and won't ever venture outside of that to see new, fresh things that might actually really challenge them and surprise them. So I think that's the good and bad of things like the streaming is that you could access anything. I just worry that sometimes people will take the easy route and just watch the things they know that they'll like and enjoy. So I hope that there'll be more ways to kind of curate and get people excited about some of the new stuff, because I think I have the same problem. Sometimes I just want to watch a safe, fun movie when I'm feeling down or whatever. But I know that whenever I do watch that movie that I've never seen and just totally shocks me and grabs me, that I always feel so thrilled afterwards, you know? And so I think, yeah, hopefully films can kind of do both.
What are a few films that if you had a film class you would show that maybe they're not, maybe it's not the metaverse of film where you can just put on something and feel good, but it's something that's actually going to make you think, maybe shake you up a little bit?
I mean, just some of my favorite films are like, I like a lot of classic movies. You know, I really like Hitchcock films. You know, Rear Window, Psycho are probably two of my favorite films. I think I was talking earlier about To Kill a Mockingbird, which I saw when I was a little kid, you know, has had this huge impact on me. A movie like Amelie, I saw when I was in high school and just starting to kind of really come together as a filmmaker. And that was super inspiring to me. I love documentaries. I think it's really about kind of that diversity of types of films. You know, I don't just like one kind of movie. I just think it's fun to kind of experience lots of different kind of films. And even as a filmmaker, it just gives you so much inspiration. I mean, I can get inspiration from a documentary just as much as I can a narrative film, you know. And yeah, I love watching all kinds of films. But I definitely think that in general, we're starting to maybe lose that appreciation for really good quality movies and the classics and things like that. So I hope that the average person will kind of lean more into that and remember that there is really good stuff out there, especially a younger generation. I feel like that didn't grow up with those really classic movies maybe isn't going to go find those necessarily on their own. So I hope there continues to be a revival for those and people will kind of seek out that good stuff, because there's also a lot of crap made, you know, too, unfortunately. But yeah, let's hope that you know, that's not just the only thing there is in the future.
Can you give us an argument why today is the best era of filmmaking that has ever existed?
Well, I mean, I can't say for sure on the creative side if the best films ever are coming out today, but I think as a filmmaker today could probably be one of the best eras just in terms of the opportunities that are out there. So, you know, now more than ever, there's more places for your film to go and people buying films. It's still incredibly hard to get a film made, nearly impossible. I mean, I feel like I won the lottery by getting to make this movie, you know? And it takes a lot of work and good talent and a lot of luck. But it's not like it used to be where there's only a couple films made a year. You know, there is a lot of ways to get a film made, and maybe it won't even be a film. Maybe it'll be a TV show or some other kind of platform. But there's a lot of opportunities. I'm a little scared, but also really hopeful for the future in terms of the opportunities. It might look a lot different than it is right now, but I'm hopeful that there'll be a lot more opportunities ahead for me personally, at least, to make more good stories and entertain people.
Okay. Do you think today is the best era? Or were there other eras where maybe they couldn't say as much, but the storytelling was richer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a film historian, so it's hard for me to say, is this the best era compared to something else? But I mean, a lot of my favorite films are not from this era. They are older, more classic movies. I mean, a lot of those movies have problems. They're not perfect either, right? But I do think there was a lot of attention to the story and trying to make an actually compelling kind of deeper meaning to some of those films. But I mean, there's obviously still incredible movies being made right now, especially in the independent space. You know, there's just so much more opportunities, more financing, more places to show the film. So I think it's a great time for being a filmmaker and being an audience member. I think the biggest challenge is just trying to weed through all the things that are out there and find those films. You know, that's probably the biggest challenge right now.
Do you ever secretly wish you could have been maybe born a few decades earlier so you could have been a filmmaker in the 70s or what? I mean,
sometimes I guess you could fantasize about that maybe there was less people trying to do it. Maybe it would have been easier if you had been a passionate filmmaker back in the day, for sure. But who knows, right? I mean, it's you never know what's the best route or how it would have worked. But I do think, though, that from my brief experiences that things do feel more closed off than they did in the past. You know, I feel like you hear these stories about I don't know, Steven Spielberg walking on the Universal lot, and just getting to kind of explore them while they're making, no one's stopping him, no security, right? Getting to meet someone or things like that. Whereas it's now, how can you even get your script to someone? I do feel like there is a lot of gatekeepers and a lot of, because so many people want this, there's also just a lot of wall put up in terms of trying to keep people out. And of course, the studios are trying to do more to encourage more diversity and more voices. But I still think in terms of actually diversity of where these people are coming from, and they're not all just connected to the same friends and family members, I think that's still where they're really struggling in terms of like, there's still a lot of really good filmmakers out there, I think, that are not getting a chance to even have their script read or get discovered. So I hope that just continues to grow. That was a big part of why I wanted to start that festival many years back, was because these films weren't getting seen and weren't getting discovered, and I know those same filmmakers exist and they're still struggling, in terms of advancing their career and now getting their real films made. I'm one of them, basically, still been going through that struggle. So it's never going to be easy, but I hope that the Hollywood system, I guess, keeps seeing is up and coming filmmakers as a way to find great stories that they can still make money with. If you think of all the classic movies we all love, they all started as original movies that no one had ever heard of. No one had usually heard of those filmmakers. And I think now things have gotten too safe and are too risk adverse, and they need to start taking some more chances. And I think it'll reward them in the long run and reward everyone, both filmmakers and audience members.
What is Hollywood missing right now that you'd like to see more of?
I think just continually wanting more of new voices, being in the mix, getting to have opportunities to tell their stories. And that means new voices of all kinds. Obviously, Hollywood has had a problem with diversity for a long time, but it's still so hard if you're not connected to have a friend or family member who's in the industry, like to get your film even read or anything seen. There's still so few opportunities and so little investment in up and coming filmmakers. No one wants to take any sort of risk. And I just think that the problem is, if they don't ever take any risk, you'll never have anything new discovered. You'll never have that big success. I think the Hollywood in general is playing it way too safe. And I feel like there could be so many cool opportunities made if you maybe, let's say, take one less mega big budget studio film, and instead, take that money and make 100 really tiny indie films, but are really compelling by talented up and coming filmmakers. I would love to see the financial data on which could actually do better. To me, having 100 bets seems like maybe a better chance, right? But I just think no one's even willing to even think about that or have that conversation or take those risks. And I think there's a lot of stories not being discovered, a lot of filmmakers not being given the chance, and hopefully that'll continue to change, because I think audiences really are craving fresh stories from unique filmmakers. When it happens, it's successful. It's always success, and you see that happen, and people get excited about it. And I think quickly they forget that was a success, And so I hope that Hollywood continues to give more opportunities to emerging voices. That's really what I'm hoping for.
Sure. But you're from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
You don't have family, you said, that's in the industry.
Yeah.
And you don't have an agent or manager, and you have a film coming out that's going to be in theaters and pretty much everywhere where movies are available, with a name attached.
For sure. Because I think I won the lottery. I was 1 in a million. I got super lucky. I worked incredibly hard. It probably took years off my life of all the energy and time I put into it. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying, should it really be this hard? Is there... What if I had given up, one of those times, I guess, and this film never would have happened? I just think there's got to be a balance. You shouldn't have to kill yourself in order to get a film made when it's a good quality film, right? I would hope that the industry that's making these films would just do a little bit more to try to discover and nurture those kind of potential filmmakers, because of course it's going to be hard. It can't be easy, but it also shouldn't be impossible for almost everyone.
Do you think there's almost sort of like a filmmaking Darwinism where they want to see how much you want it? I know that sounds like sort of like this race to the death or whatever, but is there a weeding out where they say, oh, because you said something earlier that was great and kind of lit a light bulb in my head, which was Hollywood doesn't go searching for things. They want it presented to them.
Yeah.
And I thought that, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm definitely still saying that you have to work super hard, and there's lots of people that want to be filmmakers that probably won't ever get there because they don't really have that drive. They don't really have everything they need in there. And I think if you do stick it out, it can happen. But I also do wonder about the filmmakers who didn't get there because they weren't getting that chance or they didn't push just a little bit harder. And I still think that there needs to be a little bit more balance to discovering those emerging filmmakers. And I mean, the worst case is they make a film and it's not a success, but they're doing that already. So why not take risk on a few more up and coming people?